thing off? Okay. All right, welcome to the Village of Cottage Grove and Town of Cottage Grove public meeting. This is the Village Board of Trustees and the Town Board of Supervisors on Monday, December 8th, 2025. This meeting is a hybrid meeting, so it's occurring. We have an echo in the room. All right, thanks. This meeting is hybrid, so it's taking place both virtually on Zoom and being recorded, and you can view that on our YouTube channel, and also in person at Village Hall. The link to the Zoom is on the top of the posted agenda. So it is 5:31. I'll call the meeting to order. We'll first call the Village of Cottage Grove Board of Trustees to order.
And I will call the Town of Cottage, whoops, sorry.
Yeah.
I will call the Town Board of the Town of Cottage Grove to order also.
We both have a quorum, and the agenda was properly posted, so we'll stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, this is the public's appearances, public's opportunity to speak. This portion of the meeting is for community members to share comments or concerns, but it's not a dialogue with either one of the boards tonight. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes, and we'll use an official timer to ensure that we try and stick to that 3-minute mark. And we ask that everyone please be respectful of the rights and viewpoints of others. So we'll begin with individuals who have submitted a request or wish to speak form and are present tonight. We'll open the floor to anyone else in the room and then anyone joining us via Zoom. So I do have 2 wish to speak forms. The first one is Gavin Kramer. He wishes to speak on the police cooperations and other cooperations agreements.
Gavin, one second. Can you hit the button on there? Yeah.
There you go.
All
Okay.
right.
Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gavin Kramer. Our family has been residents of the town and recently the village for over 50 years. Throughout this period, we have noticed an intense need in improvement public services to the people. Whether road construction, maintenance, or emergency, my grandfather Ellery Jensen has been providing, My grandfather, Ellery Jensen, has been providing services to this community his entire life, even creating a joint committee with the goal of uniting our community for everyone's betterment. In 2012, over 90% of both populations voted in a public sentiment survey to continue this progress. However, the committee would disband later that same year. Under the division between town and village, Cottage Grove resources are spread thin, leaving many local services to be neglected or done half sloppy. For example, the paving of bus, there are still not lines down the middle, which is a hazard during the snow season. And also Gaston Road, there's no cooperation between construction of the improvements. So there's a gap of where it's perfect and when you come down and it's very rough. Street management, emergency services, snow, and waste disposal are all divided by town and village. Cottage Grove's success is also suppressed, leaving citizens required to work elsewhere and go to other cities for commercial spending. Even housing. The population has been high enough for years, especially with the Amazon warehouse and condos coming in. It will only pressure our poorly managed community even more, raising prices. We need to take advantage of this opportunity to stop stunning the growth of Cottage Grove. I propose we unite both the townspeople and villagers into one Cottage Grove City Class 3, while also keeping the populations separate, similar to Sun Prairie. Monona has the same population as Cottage Grove, but yet has been a city for over 70 years comparatively. My question is, why have we disregarded something that would have both benefited every service in this area while also allowing us to have more zoning power, separated sewer and septic, and most importantly, Class 3 city identification? Sun Prairie has already managed this, demonstrating that we can still keep the town and village entities separate while improving our community together. According to Wisconsin legislature, a Class 3 city could distinguish between a rural and urban bracket for mill rate, or a village and township. We're already considering a joint proposal for the fire and EMS in the agenda. Why couldn't we manage to reinstate the Cooperation Council once again? I'll finish this message with a Bible verse that aligns closely with my views on this issue. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 through 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but of each of you to the interest of the others. I ask you to consider this issue. Thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Gavin. All right, we do have another wish to speak for him, Mark Spahos.
There we go. My name is Mark Spahos, and I'm proud to call Cottage Grove my home. I've had the privilege of getting to know so many residents of our town and village through my service as chaplain with American Legion Post 248 here in the Grove. In that role, I've had the honor of listening to and supporting families, raising children, retired veterans, and so many others, people who truly call Cottage Grove home. Over the past year, I've heard many voices in our community. I've seen firsthand how growth, when not managed thoughtfully, can strain the very fabric that makes our town special and our community special, including the town and the village. I've noticed signs on street corners that exist today, cash for junk cars. I've seen cars without plates, missing windows, crushed fenders rolling through my neighborhood all summer long. I've seen overflowing dumpsters with old furniture left along streets, along with mattresses and anything else that's liquidated out of an apartment of someone who quickly left. These may seem like small details, but they're reflections of challenges that, if left unaddressed, impact the quality of life for all of us. But I also know what Cottage Grove is capable of. I've seen our community thrive when people work together. That's why I'm here tonight, to encourage our leaders to do the same. I challenge both the leadership of the town and the village to focus on what truly matters: critical services. These services are the lifeblood of any community. They're not a need. As I stated in my election campaign, they are a need, they're not a want. My hope is for the village is that the leadership carefully considers further development on our terms, using property we already have available without annexing any more town land. For the town, you are in a strong financial position because of smart decision-making starting years ago, and it's time to help the village and show them what responsible fiscal responsibility as it pertains to funding critical services looks like. Instead of spending on unnecessary consultants and endless studies, I urge our leaders to have open, honest conversations about cost-effective solutions. A phased approach, if needed, thoughtfully planned, could get us where we need to be over the next 5 to 10 years, safeguarding our neighborhoods, maintaining critical services, and strengthening our community as a whole. We don't need more reports. They cost money, and they're things that we already know. We've had reports not too long ago that showed us everything that the village and the town boards really need to see. We need action. We don't need more studies. They cost money too, money that the village, quite frankly, right now doesn't have. We need collaboration, and that's most important. We need leaders who listen and respect each other, and our current resident taxpayers who live, work, and have invested in our community. We need leaders who are smart. You've all been elected because you're smart. We need you to be fiscally responsible and committed to long-term success of all of Cottage Grove, not just the village, not just the town, but all of Cottage Grove. Most importantly, you have to be committed to our critical services and how they're going to grow. Together, each of you can ensure that our town and village continues not to be just a place where we live, but a community we can now again be proud to call home, and where all of our residents are safe. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak? Is there anyone on Zoom? Okay. Then we'll move on to new business, which is the presentations and interviews of consultants regarding the fire and EMS study. There are 10 documents linked in the agenda as PDFs. So the first is a memo from me that just outlines the steps that we've taken probably since actually January through right now. So an entire year's worth of meetings and work that has gone into the RFP and the proposal and then the two consultants that we have tonight. Items 2 through 7 are kind of historical documents, so they're the previous independent studies that were done for both EMS and for fire. And then there is the RFP that went out twice, and then kind of how we came at joint decision-making for funding and kind of some of the other logistical things. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone had that in the agenda and had it ahead of time, just to revisit it. So the two new documents are the PA proposal and the Wisconsin Policy Forum proposal. And so we have those two interviews tonight. We're going to start with Wisconsin Policy Forum. So I invite them to come up to the podium and, yep, you can sit and just make sure you have that microphone guy on. You might want to turn the microphone on the standing one off, just so we don't have feedback. And so we did ask for about a 15-minute-ish presentation that kind of goes over the proposal. I solicited questions from the village board, so I have those. And we have, afterwards, we'll have questions from the town, and then both chiefs are invited to ask questions, and then we'll do a switch to the next consultant.
And I'm going to share my screen so that our PowerPoint's up there.
And while Tyler is doing that, I'll just introduce ourselves. Thank you for having us. My name is Jason Stein. I'm the president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and I have with me Tyler Burns, a researcher at the forum. And is it now up? Can everyone see it all right? Excellent. Okay. Well, great. I'm going to try and make this as quick as possible, but you're certainly welcome to interrupt with questions if you like, or we can take them at the end. The forum has a long history in both Dane County and the state of Wisconsin as a whole. We began in 1913 and were formed by the merger of two organizations, one that goes back to 1913, one that goes back to 1932 in Wisconsin. As a merged organization, we've been here since 2018. We, in general, do not make policy recommendations or we provide options to policymakers, but we do not advocate for or against specific solutions. We have a broad membership base that includes organizations around the state. That includes, corporate entities like Northwestern Mutual or Exact Sciences. That includes local governments such as the city of Sun Prairie School District, nonprofits like the United Way of Dane County and the greater Milwaukee area. And we have that broad membership base so that we can be seen as a truly independent and nonpartisan organization that's not aligned with one sector in society or another. We have now a history going back more than a decade of conducting fire and EMS studies in Wisconsin. Here you can see an outline of the more than 90 communities that have been subject of studies, either fire, EMS, or both, in a limited number of cases also police over the years. In Dane County, that's included Middleton and Wanakee, and the towns of Westport and Springfield, as well as Sun Prairie and the village of Marshall, and the towns of Sun Prairie, Bristol, Medina, and York. Go ahead. So at this stage, I'm just going to give you some of the takeaways of some of the other studies that we've done. Some of these will apply to the village of Cottage Grove. Some of them will be things that you've and Dane County have moved beyond, but I think it's just helpful to put that in context. Obviously Dane County, as you can see there in this chart, one of the leading population counties in terms of population growth in the state. And when you think about the village of Cottage Grove is really like the center of the growth in Dane County, or the hottest of the hot spots, if you will. Obviously, population growth presents challenges. There are, in terms of calls for service, need for additional staffing, station, crews, and vehicles. But at the same time, and sometimes it can be lost sight of, I think, in places that are growing, declining population, communities that are either stagnating or actually getting smaller, present their own sets of challenges. And either way, obviously, both in this community as in so many others, the aging population is something that we have to consider as we look at these issues. In here, your EMS service has a paramedic level of service. Just to note that that is an achievement, and many places outside of South Central and Southeastern Wisconsin, you have much lower level of service. It's a challenge to sustain, but a real value that the village provides and the towns provide to the surrounding communities. Here's some of the common challenges that we'd like to just sort of highlight. Many of the EMS and fire services that we have really struggled both to maintain response times, adequate response times, as well as just maintain staffing and retain staffing levels, as both they faced inflation, aging population, growing service demands. In many places, obviously, financing a shift away from the paid on call to full or part-time staffing has been challenging. There's increased costs from rising call volumes and inflation, as I said. There's a difficulty in financing apparatus. There's a difficulty in just getting it at any price and getting it delivered on time, increasingly we've been seeing, which I think does speak to the need to work as far ahead as is practicable for these things. Going on, the forum is always looking and would look in this instance for both service sharing and consolidation in cases where that can help to address some of the needs that exist. At the same time, we're not committed to that or doctrinaire about demanding or insisting that that happen in every case. For example, when we did the Sun Prairie report, they had relatively recently, when we took on that project, taken on EMS service for the village of Marshall and the two surrounding towns of Medina and York. Ultimately, we noted that that service was, although it had been expected to pay for itself, as from the perspective of the city of Sun Prairie, that was not at all happening, and that was difficult decisions had to be reached, and ultimately Marshall is moving in the direction of a private provider for their EMS service because Sun Prairie realized that they had to price that at a level where they were not losing money as a city at a time when they were thinking about going to referendum for other needs. Some of these examples in Dane County are already happening or not needed because of the population density that's here. Some of these examples reflect in the more rural counties like Walworth and Jefferson that we've worked over Lafayette County that we've worked over the years. Go ahead to the next page. Obviously in Dane County, some of the advantages that we have here of the study is both that we've worked in a nearby community as well as the consolidated dispatch provides for better data and better ability to dig into these issues and get, I think, a better result when you're trying to analyze what any community or group of communities needs. And again, most of these recommendations are things that more apply in smaller communities, but again, looking to share ambulances or stations or just work with other surrounding communities is always, something that we try and look at and have had the experience of, talking to Sun Prairie, talking to Marshall, talking to Madison for the previous study that we would bring to this one. Some of the barriers, again, much better shape here, although, you never have as much data as you want. In Dane County, we're in a much better shape with that regard. There is unified medical direction in the county. Obviously, it's not probably at the level that some people would like to see it at, but at least, compared to some other counties, it does exist. One of the things that I think the forum brings to these studies when we do it is we do have a reputation of, existing to advance, not just a contract research portfolio or a business portfolio, but the public good. And so we bring that to all of these service sharing studies, and to the extent that we're working with surrounding communities, to the extent they understand our work and our reputation, we bring that reputation of not just being a hired gun that's here to provide an answer, but really to provide something that's going to work for all communities involved, and being an honest broker in that sense. And I think the value there comes that sometimes, many times, when you look at these issues, there are longstanding problems and difficulties and challenges that everyone understands really on the ground pretty well to begin with. And it's really more about achieving a shared consensus about those, and then, at least taking the first steps towards moving forward in a unified fashion, or, going different directions, whatever the case may be. But I think sometimes just having that outside voice can help to bring things, achieve that consensus where, perhaps it should have already existed, but for one reason or another had not been possible to achieve. I mentioned that Cottage Grove is sort of the hottest of the hot spots in terms of population growth, and we just included this chart that comes from the Sun Prairie report to really illustrate that. I realize that there's inevitably growing pains that come with that sort of, explosion, or more than, I think, tripling of the population that's happened here over the past 25 years, roughly. But, nevertheless, I think it's still preferable to the challenges of stagnation or outright declines in population that we see in other places that we've worked over the years. Here, we included this chart from the previous report just to highlight that Cottage Grove is not alone in facing these really sharp increases in call volume and service demands. Here's a look at your left panel is the calls to the Sun Prairie Fire Department by the community they were serving and the year, and the right panel is EMS calls by year. We were able to get more data on the fire calls over time than the EMS. But as you can see, the fire calls more than tripled. Now that does reflect a policy change that they made to respond to more lower level, Charlie level EMS calls to send out fire to all of those. But at the same time, huge organic growth as well, and more than roughly 50% growth in the EMS calls from 2018 to 2024. Here's an example of the kind of call response time analysis that the forum provides when we do these studies. So here's a look at the service area of the city of Sun Prairie and its Marshall Station as well, the Marshall Station that it had at the time we did the study. And the colors just simply show you the time elapsed between the assignment of an EMS call to the first unit arriving on scene. And your dark blue to light blue are rapid to slower responses. So, we use this sort of analysis to sort of draw out where is the response time, sort of most problematic, where is it strongest, and then, as part of the study, work with the communities to try and address where do they want that to be strategically, both now and in the future. To go over this particular study, what both based on the request for proposals and our own review of the situation, in high-level points, and we can go into further detail, we tend to review, obviously, the previous studies, assess the current state of operation and organizational structure and staffing, compare the emergency service staffing apparatus and the operations of the peer agencies, review the station and equipment needs and the potential location of an additional station, examine the current intergovernmental agreements that exist and the general approach to governance, and then recommend any changes that might be needed. In terms of our approach for that, our methodology for that, we typically form a working group of officials from the relevant local governments that are being served. We have them convene and meet either in person or by Zoom several times over the course of the study, both to kick it off, to present findings, and then to also present possible service options, policy options that would eventually go to the elected bodies, go into the final report and then potentially go to the elected bodies for consideration. And so we, attempt to have a very collaborative back and forth with elected as well as staff of the communities over the course of the study to try to keep people in the loop. And, if there are policy options, for example, that are just non-starters for some of the relevant bodies, if that's not helpful, sometimes we just go down a different road, to try and make things as actionable at the end of the day as possible. Obviously, we'll review the budgets, the capital plans, the annual reports, intergovernmental agreements, what records exist on both the station vehicles, the dispatch data from the county, the org charts, payroll, and try to, as well, separately interview the staff and elected officials of the relevant communities, as well as neighboring communities. Sometimes it's generally helpful to get that feedback from surrounding communities as well. And then we go through drafting the report, sharing copies of the draft with staff of the affected communities and neighboring communities as well, and then integrating the feedback we get to get the most accurate and complete report we can. Nearing the end here of what we have to present, but here's a look at the qualifications. I've been at the forum since 2018 and involved in a variety of analyses of local government services and finances. Tyler is the same, and both of us worked on the Sun Prairie report. Tyler's also worked as a budget analyst within the state of Wisconsin Department of Administration. We have, in addition, other staff based in our Milwaukee office, including Ashley Fisher, who's worked on a number of fire and EMS studies for the forum, as well as staff who work on data analysis, chart design, et cetera, that we, communications that we pull into putting together these reports. And so, again, I think I've hit on most of these details you have in your proposal, the cost and timeline, which you can see here. And, the thing that I will end on is this is a photo. Every year the forum has a salute to local government, which you can always think about nominating Sun Prairie staff or program, or excuse me, Cottage Grove staff or programs for that award. But these are staff of Ashland and Bayfield counties, which recently consolidated their EMS and public safety dispatch across the two counties. And it's just a reminder that as difficult as it is to, find innovation and move public safety services together, it can happen. And we're always looking to play our little role in helping that happen. So we appreciate getting the chance to come and address both boards, and if there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them now.
So we do have questions from village trustees. Would you like me to ask them, or would you like to ask them? Okay. Trustee Severson would like to know approximately what would be the cost to study just facilities or capital needs?
So to focus a study just on capital needs and not on operations? Could you talk a little bit about the scope of what you would want the capital needs? Would it address everything that's in the report now, or would it, in the request for proposal right now, would it address any other needs with respect to capital that are not in there?
Yeah, so I guess I'll back up a little bit. So I believe that our staff provided data for the Sun Prairie study.
That's correct.
So you have a lot of calls, responses.
Certainly did interviews with staff.
Okay.
And we, certainly looked at issues like the town of Sun Prairie and service north of the interstate that would be very relevant to Cottage Grove. I don't recall if we actually had data for the village.
I think we had some data on, call volumes, but we didn't have really any idea of what the staffing was, what the response times were that area.
Sure.
It was more, if Sun Prairie were to help start responding to some of those calls, what would it look like from the Sun Prairie perspective? We hadn't really got to the point of figuring out what it would look like from a Cottage Grove perspective if they partnered with Sun Prairie.
But we have become familiar with getting the data in Dane County, what it looks like, how it's analyzed. So getting the Cottage Grove data, we feel very confident will we know that that's going to work out, and sometimes we go into communities and we really don't know. So
Okay, so then to dial it down, and why I asked about just capital and facility is the summer when we were doing our capital needs assessment, that really was kind of the impetus for the first step of this, where we were talking about what are going to be our future capital needs, and then it kind of morphed into a bigger thing. But if we dial back the scope to not consider governance or any of those things, where we, just say we're keeping a volunteer fire department and that sort of thing, I'm looking at, okay, what are our facility needs in terms of what PAA recommended a couple years ago, possibly needing another station in the village for response times.
right.
So I'm trying to look for a cost savings and some efficiencies
Sure.
in that, so that's why I asked that question.
We certainly could do that, and there would be a significant reduction in cost. I do think it can be difficult to separate the operational aspects and the capital aspects. I'll give you an example. Certainly one thing I think that you would want to analyze is, to what degree, when you're thinking about serving north of the interstate, as an example, would you want, to what degree is that appropriate to look at service from the city of Madison, to work with city of Sun Prairie, or to just put a station, another station north of the interstate? And I feel like the operational aspects of it are really part of that. That being said, I'm not saying you couldn't split off capital. We'd really have to give it, I'd really have to give it some thought beyond saying there could be a significant discount if you really, but I would also want to think through a little bit more what you would need to have in and out to really be able to do a credible capital analysis. So, right now, you've got all the operational data. If you're going to do it as the request went out, you got everything you need to do the capital side of it. Whereas, you'd have to really think about, well, what can we set to one side and get you that cost savings, but still get something that it's worth you doing.
Okay. My question is, I've really appreciated the chance to learn more about fire and EMS operations and the challenges that they face and how it takes to balance the department and municipal and district needs. It's very complicated. So as we look at this study, it feels very important that we take a full view of both services, especially with facility decisions that are needing to be made. So my question is, how do you balance the history and culture of each organization while still giving it an unbiased best practice recommendation for change?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing that we genuinely try to do, and it sounds simple, but I don't think is to be taken for granted, is listen to everybody and really come at it from the standpoint that, to just take the elected officials, for example, they're all trying to represent people. They have things that they can and can't achieve in terms of where they can lead their communities to. And I think it's easy to come in from outside the community and say, oh, well, it's simple. We ought to do X, Y, and Z. And you got to listen really to people to know, is that even on the table? Is X even on the table? And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, even when X is the most logical thing, it's not. Or it's not right now. Or it's not unless other preconditions are met. And so I think that's a lot of what we try and do is listen enough to know not to give a series of policy options that amount to, butt head into wall,
And I would just add, one of the things that Policy Forum does is, like I say, we listen, we look at the data, but we understand that the numbers aren't the full story. And so, we're willing to talk to the people that are out on the ground, the chiefs, the sort of, the folks that are doing the work, the people that are actually representing the communities to understand, what that culture is, what things, I know my wife was pastor down at Hope Lutheran Church for a good while. I know how important this volunteer fire department is to Cottage Grove. And so, we listen to people, we understand what those cultural things are, so that when we're talking about options, we understand, hey, this is maybe the numbers say we should do this, but there's more to the story than just the numbers, and that's our approach.
All right, this is from Trustee Stoa. You had the slide about the core project team of analysts and consultants and their qualifications. Do you anticipate the need for any subcontractors, and if so, what would their role be? And how would you ensure they have experience in fire and EMS organizational analyses?
I don't anticipate any subcontractors at this time. We might, at times we've employed people outside the forum just to gather data. But I think in this case, I don't think that would be necessary. So I wouldn't anticipate it at this time. Yeah, we certainly have advisors, fire and EMS chiefs around the state that we will go out, and when there's like sort of technical questions of service delivery, we'll go and consult with, but it's not on a paid basis. So in that sense, there wouldn't be subcontracting.
From Trustee Murphy, what steps would you take to ensure that any recommended changes, structural, staffing related, or financial, are informed by direct input from firefighters and EMS staff so that the final plan supports long-term recruitment and retention?
Is the question rank and file officers? Or just from within the departments?
Yeah, within the departments that, that this is a plan we can all feel proud of and move forward with together.
One of the things that we always do is, in any community, is we talk to both the electeds, the top administrator or administrators, as well as the chiefs, and often they're captains and other individuals, and this isn't a bad thing, but a lot of times, village or city finance director, the administrator, the fire and EMS chief, they all have a little bit different perspective on whatever it happens to be. And, you know, even when they disagree with each other, usually to us, what they all think has some validity. You know, even if you may be on one thing or another, you agree a little bit more with this person or that person. So from my perspective, it's like you just got to do it, you know? So it's not even like something that I think we deserve a lot of credit for. It's just you got to do it.
Yeah, I don't have a ton of that add to that. I know, you know, in the studies that I've been part of, the conversations that I've had with EMS fire leadership has been very informative to me, both sort of professionally in terms of it, but just also understanding, you know, how these jobs are done, what stresses fire chiefs, rank and file EMS folks have, and so, you know, again, the numbers may say one thing, but the person out there doing the job has to feel comfortable doing the job, and so that's always important to keep in mind.
Right, and then finally, from the village side, given that the village and town have very different service demands geographically, operationally, in terms of growth, how would your study account for those differences in a way that avoids a one-size-fits-all model, ensures that the village can responsibly plan for staffing and facilities while our growing population requires, but still supports collaborative solutions that work for both communities?
We always try, it's a great question.
That's Trustee Murphy.
Yeah, okay, that's a good question. We always try and be straight shooters on stuff like this. I mean, I think we've seen this before. We saw it with Sun Prairie, for example, and we've seen it in other communities. You know, towns and villages are not the same thing, you know, newsflash. And their priorities and values can be different. And it can be challenging to, even when everybody's operating with the best of intentions and in good faith, meeting everyone's needs and highest priorities. I think what we try and do again is listen, present the data, present the options, and then again, but one thing that we know we can't do, and you guys should know that no outside contractor can do, is really change people's values. I mean, they have the values that they have, and so I think the best you can do is say, okay, given that that's what people's priorities are, and now we know what they are, find the best way to try and, you know, meet everybody in the middle. But I think a lot of times in these situations, to make it work, there's got to be something that feels like a sacrifice on many sides. And, you know, if you've got something like that and everybody feels like they can live with it, you probably got something pretty good.
One other thing to add is, you know, neither of us, Jason likes to say, we don't have a dog in this fight. We don't come in with a preconceived notion that A and B need to merge, that the service needs to be at this level. That's all, you know, part of the study. And so we're not going to come in here and say, hey, you need to merge or you don't need to merge. We don't know what we're going to say yet. We are familiar with the area, we're familiar with some of the data, but we don't know what the study is going to say. And we don't come in with a sort of, here's the solution.
Yeah. I mean, a good example was Sun Prairie. You know, we went in many ways looking for ways that they could partner with more communities, and in that case, their biggest priority was to address sort of the challenges of an existing partnership that really wasn't working for them, and so you really just have to sort of open. You have to open the box. It's like Christmas. You just got to open the box and see what's inside and then act accordingly.
Are there any other village questions?
Yeah, I had a question. So thank you very much for kind of walking us through how you're going to approach this. And I guess the one thing is in the RFP, you know, it's talking about evaluating options and new municipal partners or changes in municipal partners. But then when you walk through it, you were talking about the facility and looking at, you know, where buildings could be. It seemed out of order on the proposal that you sort of walked through, in the sense that it's really two phases in my mind. First phase is the organization and how it's put together. Mm-hmm. The second thing is the facilities. So it's interesting, you know, your timeline is 6 months and it doesn't really blow it out. Do you view this as a two-phase approach, and how does that fit into your thinking?
I mean, I would just say your order is to really understand the operations and facilities and equipment and, you know, sort of capital assets of the existing partners. You know, that how the service demands have changed and how you expect them to evolve. You're dealing with the surrounding then you're starting to branch out and talk to the surrounding communities, right, that are outside the service area but might be partners. And then I think at the end you're starting to look at policy options, including what capital investment might be needed. So I don't know if that answers your
Okay,
question,
yeah, it
but
does.
that's the order I'm thinking of.
Because the facility and the capital stuff is the very last thing. And when you walk through, it was kind of
Yeah.
in the middle, which was sort of odd, so thank you.
Yep, no problem.
We'll move on to town questions.
Hi. I want to perhaps maybe get a clarification from some of your earlier comments on your presentation with regards to, I believe you used the word regionalized services, or, and I would have to say that in our particular situation here, between Cottage Grove Fire, Deer Grove EMS, we kind of have our own Eastern Regional District set up because of just the extraordinarily large geographical area
Yes,
that,
right.
that
Right.
Chief Lang and his folks cover, and then Chief Archibald and the fire department isn't solely limited to the 36 square miles or what's left of it of the town of Cottage Grove and the village. And getting to the gist of my question is, how much of this study is going to be placed upon more largely regionalized, or regionalizing the services here, or are you gonna concentrate on what we currently are?
Sure.
Go ahead.
That's a great question. I think it's certainly the focus is just largely on you guys and what your needs are. I think your point is well taken, that it's already a big service area. And, you know, you're always looking at, you know, you have challenges and you got to meet them, right? So to the extent there's any partner out there who can help you, I think it's worth at least doing some basic due diligence to see if that's the case. That being said, you know, the focus is always on the communities themselves, first and foremost.
You know, and while, if it's a piggyback to that, if you don't mind. While I realized with the village's explosive growth that there is a developing need for an additional facility somewhere, I guess, I would want to see, or at least my hopes are, that whatever this secondary structure, or the satellite station, whatever it comes to be called, you know, is for our needs collectively, as opposed to branching out to perhaps gobble up some of the surrounding areas that maybe geographically would work, but, you know, I don't want this to be a study looking to expand what we already have. You know, and then also with regards to funding, the village president and myself were a little bit at odds against this. Both the town and the village, all of us here, worked our tails off to come up with the current fire and EMS agreement that we currently have. And cross my fingers, knock on wood, whatever, it's working well right now. And I don't know that adding additional outside information to perhaps make some look at renegotiating or redoing that, you know, why, let's just leave sleeping dogs lie and continue that way. I mean, there's enough information that the village and the town are requesting from you folks, rather than, I would consider the funding aspects perhaps kind of a fringe type portion of the study, if that
Okay.
makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say to that is, any examples I've given here tonight are really hypotheticals or shouldn't be taken as a view that we have of things, and number one. Number two, again, when it comes to the study itself, we're not going to be coming here to sell anybody anything. It's, it'll be what questions do people have? What seems like to us also, is essential to knowing what to do next, and then just trying to answer those questions and give some options for the future and get out of the way.
That's all, thanks.
To the butting heads comments, I think that, I agree that, gosh, I'm breaking my own rule, I'm the microphone, yeah. To the butting heads comment, I think that, yeah, we're all in agreement. I know that a lot of hard work has gone in to make sure that we have agreements between municipalities and all parties involved. I don't want to limit what happens 10 years from now because of a study done now. And I guess that's where I want, to make sure that we do our due diligence during this period of time so that we can make informed decisions much more into the future. But go ahead.
Well, I appreciate that, but quite frankly, with the growth that you guys are experiencing, and Lord only knows what's gonna happen in the township, is this all gonna be moot in 10 years? I mean, we could be, yeah, I mean, we could have this monstrous type of municipality here. What's that?
Yeah.
I know, true, but I'm just saying, so,
You did the last study, right, in 2022?
No.
Or who did that one? Okay, okay. I just, her comment about 10 years, that one is 4 years ago. And I just worry about the 6 years after the 4. So I don't think we need to add another 4 years onto a study. I read the last one, and all makes common sense to me that we don't need another study. I hate to say that, but that's my opinion, so
Well, and I'm not here to
understand.
give an opinion on that. If
Yeah.
you decide you need one, we've told you what we would do, and we'll certainly be, understanding either way.
Well, I'm on with, what her comment was, basically, that we need 10
Sure.
years out. We can't keep having a study to keep going 10 years out all the time. That's my opinion, And I'm sticking to it. No, just kidding.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for the information you've given us. But I am curious, if you would please tell us how you make use of AI in your work.
Pretty carefully. I've sort of told the staff that beyond in general, if they're using AI, it gets cleared by me or one of the research directors. I think it can be helpful for, we're doing a study looking at the use of medications for opioid use disorder, for medications for opioids addiction in prison and jail facilities in the state. And so, sometimes it's to do an initial review of literature about that. You can go to AI, and then you can sort of dig into some of the individual studies that come up. But and we use it for certain, like writing code and computer programming and certain data wrangling tasks. But you got to be pretty careful with that. I mean, I wouldn't anticipate it would be used a lot for your study, and I think that would be good for you guys. If I was in your seat and somebody told me they were going to use it a lot for your study, I would be pretty worried about that. Sure.
Go
I just have one follow-up question. So on one of your slides, you talked about the common challenges that EMS and fire districts have around the state. And as I read through that list, I sat here thinking we're in pretty good shape because we're not in that scenario.
Right.
But then you talked about common recommendations, right?
Yeah.
That are kind of going around the state. So what would be different than maybe the recommendations that you have given Sun Prairie or some of these other entities? Because especially if I read, and I have read the Sun Prairie study, we are similar in a lot of ways. So why would an analysis of us be different? Like, what would be the value that we couldn't glean from that?
Well, I mean, you guys are, as fast as Sun Prairie has grown, you guys have grown faster, first of all. You know, I mean, Sun Prairie is kind of so unique because they had that nonprofit fire department, which was, it's not the only one in the state, but it's pretty unusual. It was pretty unusual, especially for a community of that size. You know, I think you all are a little different in that, I mean, you do have the interstate right so close to you. So that's another factor I think to think about for communities, you know, to the extent that you might want to partner, you know, that is an asset in that regard, in terms of being able to move vehicles quickly. I think, you know, you guys, you know, Sun Prairie owns its stations. You guys are in a little different arrangement, or at least the village is in a little different arrangement with that in that respect. So, I mean, those would be some of the, I mean, again, one of the reasons why we were interested in doing this study is we felt like we could come in and do a better job. Not that we do a bad job in other situations, but we could do a better job even than we would normally do because we feel like, hey, we don't say we're smarter than anybody else, but we start a little bit ahead than where we normally would. So.
And then the other thing, again, we keep reiterating this idea that we're gonna listen to the community and sort of bring forward some of these cultural differences, some of these things that are very important to the city, the village and the town, some of the history, some of the sort of desires for regionalization or not. And so, you know, the difference between just reading the Sun Prairie study and the Cottage Grove study is, you know, there's a lot of stuff in that Sun Prairie study that's specific to Sun Prairie, that fire department that they had for a long time. Things changed there, policy changes. You know, again, ideas that work in one place don't necessarily work even just down the road. And so, you know, the value is to have us come and review your data and talk to your leaders and you folks in this room and kind of get a sense of what it is you're looking for from your fire and EMS services.
Yeah, and the one other thing I would just say is, you know, in that case where you ended up having the recommendation about Marshall, that's pretty unusual that we'd have a recommendation like that. Typically, if there's a intergovernmental agreement that exists, it's typically been existed for longer and been a workable arrangement or a more sustainable arrangement. So I think there would be, you know, I suspect that would be the case here. I mean, we'd have to see, but so I think those would be some of the differences that come to mind.
I'm gonna let questions from our two chiefs, if you have any.
I'll have two questions. The first one kind of piggybacks off of Trustee Severson's question. I too follow your studies because you do a lot of EMS related studies and we have something we can learn from all of them. There are, generally speaking, similar recommendations for all of them, and they're good, bad, or indifferent, relatively general. This study asks for some specificity in regard to a location of a potential second building and understanding a timeline could be difficult because of the variance in call volume. So how do you balance the statements you make of we give you options with we're asking for specifics?
Yeah. I mean, I think we certainly gave some specifics, I think, with respect to Sun Prairie, and we could have, of where their stations would be, recommended it. I think there was an idea there of having, for the city, of having stations kind of at the four corners of the city. We made, although we didn't, it's not really our way of operating to come in and just be like, well, that's wrong. We certainly made a statement that, we didn't think that, we thought that on the north part of the city, one was justified. We thought the other two locations that they were thinking about for the south part of the city and the east part of the city didn't necessarily make sense to us. And we also provided a possible option of using, I think it's Station 11, I'd have to remember, but of the Madison's operation. So my point just being that typically the communities are, a lot of times the communities like where we're looking at like a county-wide EMS, they're just not at that stage where they're really ready to go and, because we're not dealing with a bunch of communities that have never worked with each other. We're just dealing with, a limited number of communities. I think there could be more specificity in this case. Does that make sense?
And one of the thought, if you check out our Wanakee Middleton study, that one, because they were further down the line on, again, working together, they were more open to partnering because that was their call volume, the high growing call volume was very close together. So then we put together options for, should we have a joint station? Should we have, some sort of additional merger? So in that case, we had the specifics in terms of costs and staffing and those sorts of things. And so, depending again on what the community is looking for, we can ramp up the specificity. But coming in and just saying Jason and I are going to tell you where things are going to go and who needs to work where, that's not what we do typically.
Yeah, but I mean, looking at what property does the village own, what property the towns own, where could it, to the extent that we had direction, we'd work with that and deliver what was needed, I think.
Yeah, I think the component of it is we can identify, statistically speaking, that based off of the previous PAA study, where our response data was going, that at some point in time we're going to need another resource, which means we need more space. The piece that we've always talked about, that we can say we need more space and we can say it needs to be there, but that's a general statement that the elected officials are going to want more information on, which is where you come in. Yeah. The next question would be about data, and specifically about population data from DOA.
Sure, yeah. This has come up before, yeah.
Are you open to locally produced data in conjunction doing both? Adding both data sets to make this is the DOA projection, which we know is low and probably not going to be accurate in 5 days, as opposed to the local projection, which keeps track of all the things locally that probably will be more accurate.
Yeah, we are open to that. I mean, I have not looked at this in depth for Cottage Grove, but it's my impression that the DOA data has undershot where the actual growth of the communities, these relevant communities, has been over the years. And so we're certainly open to, and I didn't mention it in the intro, and maybe I should have, but we're certainly open to working with the village about, what developments have been, approved and permitted, what does zoning look like, and to the extent that we feel like the population estimates, growth estimates need to be dialed up from what, our starting place would be DOA, but it wouldn't be the ending point.
Thank you.
First question I have, you mentioned that you would be reaching out to several fire service leaders and resources for some of the technical information and stuff. Would you be willing to share that list of resources that you'd be using, since you're going to be using them as subject matter experts? what you use for resources for that?
Sure. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. I mean, I'd have to, I haven't even, we have various people that we go to. We'd have to see on this one. But I mean, certainly the chief of the North Shore fire department is one person that we've went to a number of times over the years, and is Bob Whitaker, who's serves on forum committees and board, so on and so forth.
And then my next question, so I read the Sun Prairie study, and it talked a lot about opportunities for consolidation with Windsor, and it specifically mentioned Cottage Grove. My question is, because that study specifically mentions so much consolidation with Cottage Grove, is this study going to push heavily on consolidation, or is it going to have an open pathway that doesn't assume consolidation because of the previous study that was already done?
Yeah, I mean, we certainly wouldn't assume consolidation here. You obviously have the growth in the growth that's going to happen and is happening north of the interstate. So you'd have to think about, but again, Sun Prairie's a ways away from that. So the city, you guys are still much closer to that. So I think there's a time down the line where some of this growth that's happening in both the city of Sun Prairie and the village of Cottage Grove is going to sort of increasingly spill into, my guess would be, into the town of Sun Prairie. And I think it'd be worth thinking about how to deal with that. But I think that's, again, we need to look at this more, but my initial impression coming into it is that that's not something that's probably ready right now.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Are there any other questions? If not, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Yep, our pleasure. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Then we'll make the switch. Yeah, just take a little break, and then we'll have PAA present. Does anyone want a cookie? I made 2 kinds this time.
Yeah, if you could, do you have a clicker or something? You can just kind of
And then halfway in, we're gonna patch in the Cedars report.
Yeah.
They should be.
Yeah, you can just call on them and they can unmute.
It's Nicole.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can just kind of
Just
call
call
on
them
them.
in.
Yeah.
And then they're gonna pull up their. They're gonna.
So, yeah, okay, I'll unshare it and then they'll be able to, do that.
Sure. I don't know if I have enough. How many?
10.
Oh, I got 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I use yours? Sure.
All right. So we all have copies of the presentation, so we'll welcome PAA to present to us next. I think we're going to bring the slides up on the screen as well for you. So we'll let you, we do about a 15-minute presentation, and then we have questions from the village board, the town board, and our chiefs. And if you could just press the little guy talking so everyone can hear you online as well. Thank you.
Is that okay? Okay. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and for the invitation to submit a proposal. This is Tim. You know Tim Franz from last time. He worked on your previous study. Jim Austin is another one of our fire EMS consultants who will be working on this as well. My name is Kevin Brenner. I'm president of PAA. We're also going to be joined tonight by Cedar Corporation. Nicole, Chris, and Corey from Cedar Corporation are going to be talking about their part of this. And they'll be working on the space needs analysis and the facility component of the requested services. Next slide. So again, we're very happy to be here. We have conducted, PAA has been around about 27 years. We've conducted over 50 fire EMS organizational studies similar to the one that you requested proposals on. We have worked with over 100 municipalities in the state of Wisconsin. Most of these are very small communities, townships, villages. We'll talk about that in a minute. All of our fire and EMS consultants are practitioners. I think that's very important. They've served as firefighters, they've served as EMTs, paramedics, as well as in fire leadership roles. A number of our associates have also been elected leaders like you. So we take that perspective. A number of them have been mayors or town chairs. Almost all of our municipalities that we've worked with are under 15,000. That's our sweet spot. We want to serve the smaller communities of our state, particularly in fire EMS. We're very data-driven and performance-based. The last thing we want as practitioners is because I've been through this many times as an administrator myself, last thing we want is a study that's going to be on the shelf. We want to give you practical, common sense solutions, and that's what we pride ourselves in. Overall, our firm has served over 250 Wisconsin municipal clients, and we serve about 60 to 70 clients a year. We're all about continuous improvement. Next slide. Is that going to stay on? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, I don't have to hold it then. These are our current clients. You'll note that many of these are similar in size to Cottage Grove, both the town and the village. The thing I wanted to point out is the number of towns we work with. Typically, when we're approached to do a study like this, it'll come from a village or a city, and then we ultimately are engaged with the surrounding townships. And you can see this year alone, we've worked with over 15 townships in working with their adjacent municipalities, whether they be a village or a city, on a variety of fire EMS studies, many of which do result in some consolidation. In fact, tonight, tomorrow night, I should say, we're very excited. We started some work with Waupun and 3 of the surrounding townships, Chester, I'm going to get the names wrong, Chester,
Town of Waupun and town of
Trenton. A city and 3 towns that are consolidating their fire department. And it's taken two years of work, but we're very excited that we've seen the fruition of this work. Many times the towns hire us after we do the study to help negotiate the intergovernmental agreements that might emanate from the study. I'm going to ask Tim maybe to go through just very quickly go through the components of the study that you requested, and then we're going to turn it over to Cedar Corporation. They're going to talk specifically about their piece of this project.
All right.
Next slide.
Yeah.
Yep, there we go. Yep.
Okay. And the blue ones are more our section, and then when we get to the facility things, I'll have the folks from Cedar Corp talking to you. But so as Kevin said, our approach, and I'm sure you've looked back at the studies and some of the work that we've done before, is very data-driven, that believe that everything should be able to be measured, and that's good. How good of a job are we doing? And I know a lot of steps have taken place to do that. And rather than saying, well, I think we need something, or we should hire 6 people, we should hire 10, buy this truck, buy that, put it here or there. That's subjective, but objective, what it's going to do. What is that going to do for us? If we spend that money, what is it? And how is it going to get us close to, and a big part of that data function, and we'll get ahead, is this benchmarking process we do. What are the key performance indicators? What level of service are you trying to achieve, or what is it that the people want? And then we look at what do you have and identify any gaps and say, you're meeting it, and if you're not, what we think you would need to put into place to meet that level of service that you want to have. And that's key. So to do that, I know, even though we've done some previous work here, we still have to go back and update our data. Things have changed. I know that the village has grown. I'm sure the towns have too. There's a lot more people around, and that also means that there's more demand on the services that are there. So in looking at the organizational structures of the department, I know some staff has been added in EMS, and that was part of our study that we recommended that. And then it's looking at resource deployment strategies. How is it being done? And do we need to change that strategy to accomplish those performance indicators? Do there need to be changes with that? And what are the critical issues that are facing the future challenges for the town and village? And really, those are one that you have, which is a positive challenge, is the growth that you're having around here. The other thing is the pressures that are on, that EMS is primarily full-time. Pressures are on fire departments, combination fire departments, paid on call, volunteer departments, on being able to meet demand with paid on call staff. Some places are doing it, some are not, but and looking at that to see if that is happening. So, and then another piece of it was to look at how is the current governance and what do the agreements look like, and should changes take place with that. And what's fair cost sharing? That's always a difficult piece.
And something that we've lately worked out, as Kevin said, some of the places where we've gone through these studies now a few years later have asked us to come back and say, help us put this contract together and help us negotiate this, what it looks like, work out the fine details on making that happen. So we've really been gaining a little bit more experience with that, with the unique challenges that all these communities have, and making sure that everybody feels not only are they getting what they believe the level of service that they're looking for, but making sure that everyone feels comfortable that they're paying their fair share of the cost, and how we can structure those agreements. The other thing is then how do you structure the direction of the department now, or departments, both now and in the future. So then the next piece is speech needs, or we might jump next and then we'll have them. Okay, all right. So then, and to do that, we're going to be looking at comparing, the staffing models with similar districts. That's that benchmark that we talk about, analyzing that staffing and response time performance from before, and looking at those goals we set aside, what has been adopted. And I know more so the EMS side, we've really looked at that, and benchmarking went through quite a process with due diligence looking at that, and I know they're providing you a lot of data. Similar things with the fire department, and looking at what does it look like now, what are the trends, what do we believe that it's going to look like 2031, 2037, again, and saying more so, if and when changes need to be made, is it just about adding resources, or the resources are being added to meet a specific goal, a specific response goal? And how are the departments situated to be able to provide that level of service? And how we go about doing that, the last one, if I can jump ahead, or do you want
to the next one, Matt?
Next slide.
Yeah,
a key thing is we talk about benchmarking, but we do this in a multitude of ways, because the questions come up, what are other similar communities doing? And communities are unique, but they have more in common than they have differences in some places. But then industry best practices, these are more of the subjective ones, but even more important is meeting the requirements of the state of Wisconsin, SPS 330 requirements, 314, and health services for EMS, and how we're going about doing that. And the state statutes, those are the absolute, you have to do those things, or you could have problems. And another industry best practice is insurance service office that we have in there. An example that I can give you on this where folks don't do that, there was a town we were working with, and they were just, I don't think we need all this analysis. We're just going to go ahead, and I think we can get a better contract from this department for our township. And they did that, and didn't look at things like response time, distances, travel times, things like that. And folks got upset because they found out that now the fire station was beyond 5 miles of their property, and they could no longer get insured. So those are the kind of things we like to do, and look at these things. And through all of it, our number one mantra is first, do no harm. However, whatever system and recommendations that we make, it's about making the system better, not taking away from at least the level of service that you currently have.
Let me introduce Cedar Corporation. So we're proposing to team with Cedar Corporation. It's an engineering architectural firm that we recently worked with the city of Menominee. Menominee has a lot of commonality with Cottage Grove, fast-growing community. It's home of UW Stout. And we were able to work with them it was more of a staffing study. But tonight we have Chris and Corey, I believe, and Nicole, and they're going to come on now and talk about their piece of this proposal. So who's going to take it, Nicole or Chris? Yeah, unshare.
This one here, so.
Yeah.
I'm the Director of Architecture for Cedar Corporation. As you can see, we have offices located around the state of Wisconsin. So we have folks in your area. We do a lot of municipal architecture and engineering projects, and we've been around since 1975. We're celebrating our 50th anniversary this year. We're really excited about that. I have a little bit of a passion for public safety facilities, as I'm a deputy chief and EMT for a combination department, combination district rather, that has 3 outlying stations. So with that tonight, we have Chris Dressler, who will be our project architect and project manager for Cedar Corporation's scope of this project. And we have Nicole. Nicole's a GIS expert and will be assisting us with all the data collection and response time analysis, location analysis. So we have a very broad team for your project. These are the experts you will be working with. There's a few folks that will pull in from the background here. But as we start to look at your project, we offer a lot of services. So we have the architectural services, we have the planning, grant writing, economic development, municipal engineering. So we can start to forecast, what are the necessary space needs of your department or your station, and then we can start to analyze costs and associated improvements. What I always talk about with clients is it's one thing for us to tell you, this improvement's needed, or we can't use this facility. We got to expand or renovate or build a new facility. But what are the costs, or what are the options to get you there? Because sometimes, an alternative might not be something we're gonna shoot for. Like the ultimate goal is we're going to build a new station. We can't do that maybe tomorrow, but we can plan for that in 5 or 10 years. So how do we get there? So a little bit more about Cedar Corporation. I think it's important to note that, we have our 5 offices throughout the state of Wisconsin, but we service 200 towns, over 90 cities, 100 villages, and 43 counties. I've been with Cedar Corporation nearly 25 years. I'm one of the owners of the firm, and I can tell you, our slogan here, your projects, our passion. It's very true, because 90% of our work is repeat business. So Chris, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about what we do specifically.
Yeah, so for our architectural stuff, so we have kind of a long list of different things here, but we do the main focus that your project will be including is the future planning and implementation. That's kind of the ultimate goal with this one. But we also also have our physical site assessment, along with some of our engineering analysis to kind of help determine what's going to be the best approach for both the town and village on their facilities. But as kind of mentioned before, as we kind of develop what needs to happen for your communities, we can look at conceptual design, and we will have some budgeting included in our scope to kind of give you that implementation and future planning. But then we've gone through and done a ton of fire station design, EMS, and all sorts of emergency facility designs, and just a few other things that we've implemented into our designs as training props for the members of the departments to be able to train on site and keep those skills sharp and everything, along with security and design, security systems, as well as soft security design, and how we implement those into design. And then along with our architectural services, we will be providing GIS, or Geographic Informational System, services. As Corey had mentioned, Nicole will be the lead on this component of the work, but mainly looking at data conversion and analysis. So basically taking all that information that PAA would collect from the departments, bring all that information together and start creating these maps that identify response times and, and then also like as we're looking at site selections, if that is something that we go down towards, being able to kind of pinpoint where can we get the best response time for your guys' service areas. And then to talk a little more specifically on your project, so our scope would include the analysis of your current facilities, really taking a deep dive into the building condition and suitability for those facilities, if they can be reused, used as is, renovated, or expanded upon. And evaluating all aspects, including building systems, site access, and traffic patterns around the facility. Along with that, that's going to kind of help, kind of determine response times and things like that. And then from there, we'll bring more of our GIS in, and for location and response analysis. So kind of looking at developing high hazard areas, excuse me, and response maps based on call data that the staff would be able to provide, and developing staffing locations to assess those response times a little bit further, and time response time maps based on the actual streets and drive times and things like that.
All this work that we put into it and working with Tim and Jim and Kevin, it allows us to put alternatives together that we can explain to you and educate you into different components of maybe your existing facilities, the response times, staffing levels, perhaps equipment, or maybe even some procedural changes. But at the end, we give you the information so that way you can make an informed decision moving forward. So, yeah, thank you.
Matt, there's one more slide, I think, if you could pull it back up. It's the very last slide, I believe. Thank you, Cedar Corp. Again, we're excited to team with Cedar Corp again. We had a really good experience working with them up in Menominee, and it was well received. I work up there. Why do we want to serve Cottage Grove? I just want to let you know that PA really has a passion for what we do. We're all practitioners, and I believe Cedar Corporation is the same way. I was surprised. I thought we had the record for the number of municipalities we've served, but I think they've served a lot more. But we believe we want to give back and provide affordable services to small local government. It's more than a business to us, it's a calling. We have a personal connection. We'd really love to come back and assist you again. We did that 2022 Fire EMS Organization Review. We're headquartered in nearby Whitewater, and I personally would like to come back here and do some work. I worked in Monona many years. I hope don't hold that against me. I worked in Monona, but my kids went to Monona Grove schools, and I came out to church out here. I worked with Christy many, many years ago when she was the school board president. So it would be kind of cool to come back and work in this area. So we have questions now. I know you probably went farther than 15 minutes. I'm sorry about that, but
yeah.
so
We'll
questions for either of us, either Cedar Corp or for Tim and I.
Okay. Paula, do you want to start with your questions?
Sure. So since 2022, in the last study you did, we haven't changed our governance structure, agreements, our contracts, our service delivery models. So I guess I was a little surprised to see the price tag for that kind of half of things being as high as it is, given that we haven't made any of those changes. So can you tell us a little bit more about why those costs are coming in? And then when you respond, can you make sure to hit the button?
Sure.
Or whomever. Thank you.
And a lot of it, all those gets back. I know we have it kind of separately priced out or whatever, but as I said, data drives everything, and we have to go back, and even though I have an understanding of the department, we have to go back and get all those numbers again and update and reevaluate, look at the governance structure. Is it meeting, are there any impediments to being able to meet demand based on that, based on what the demand is now? So that's why we can't just say, well, okay, the numbers just went up a little bit. It's a little bit more dynamic than that. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, the facilities portion that Cedar Grove will do, the GIS mapping and such, is that incumbent on you collecting additional data, or can they do that separately?
That is incumbent on that. So a few things, they want to plot where demand is, and some of the other things that we might take it a little bit farther as far as like where your paid on-call staff is coming from in relation to the stations. Since we're looking at potentially new location, or is this location serving you correctly? So that's one of the things that we look at. And then another thing, some data that we need to provide for them in design is that if we're looking at potentially a new building down the road, even if it's meeting its demand right now, the building will highly recommend that it's designed to meet your demands for the future for staffing. And unfortunately had a lot of experience in the last couple of years in communities that hadn't considered this, and now they have full-time staffing in their stations, and they're not equipped for it. They're having recruitment and retention problems. I actually feel sorry for their staff in some locations, on that they're trying to adapt and use buildings that were never meant for that. So we're gonna, from that perspective, looking at the data, we're gonna be probably looking a little bit farther out from a facility standpoint that they're going to need.
Can I add one thing? Maybe the governance and the agreements haven't changed, but some of you have changed. So we, as part of our due diligence, we want to talk to all the elected leaders. We did that last time, and we do it again. So that's pretty intensive, work. So that's part of what we built into the project. So.
Are you good with the rest of the questions? Okay. So my question starts to be repetitive for everyone sitting in here, but new for you. So I've really enjoyed the opportunity and chance to learn more about EMS and fire operations and the challenges that they face and what it takes to balance a department, a municipality, and the district needs. And as we look at this study, it feels really important that we take a full view of both services, especially when it comes to making facility decisions in the future. So my question is, how do you balance the history and culture of each organization while still giving an unbiased best practice approach, recommendation for change?
Okay. And that's a really good question, because as objective and analytic as we like to be, there is also there's an emotional and subjective piece that goes along with this, particularly in police and fire. And there's a lot of history and everything behind that. So we try to bring that into play as well. Some of those things, I'll say, for example, from a facility standpoint, that, and this actually is connected to the cost and economics of it, is that in looking at facility things in the culture of the paid on call department, is it's in your best interest, as in ours and our recommendation, to make as much of that or all of it work as long as possible because of cost. Give you an example, one full-time person is at least $100,000 a year, minimum. And one firefighter does not make a firefighting crew. So now you're looking at multiples. So we take those things into consideration, and even some of the structural things, recommendations that we make in some communities, like even designing the building, that will say, well, we don't need a day room because we don't have full-time firefighters yet, or we don't want to build this out. And I say, well, you want your paid on call people in the building as much as possible and be as comfortable as possible, and facilities for that. Those are some of the things that would try to get that feeling for that history and culture, to try to keep that, because no matter what, still, and we always try to approach it from a standpoint of research, not to come to any foregone conclusions, but my foregone conclusion is that even probably, hopefully, not in the next 25 years, if there's need for full-time staff, that it's not going to be a 100% career staff department. So how are you going to make that continue to happen? Because that can be difficult at times in a lot of places, and the perspectives that we can bring in on that. But it does also tie into facilities. A building, people don't think it's a recruitment and retention tool. It is. And when it comes to paid on call folks, making it a place for them to want to be is important. And I know some people might look at that and say, well, you know, we don't want our fire department to be a social club or anything, but you wanted a place for people that they want to be, because you're targeting 18 to 21-year-olds that want to come on here. So that's sometimes how it's deteriorated in places, why we're losing that as part of our society. We're losing that fabric that holds that together. So all those things, we do take that into consideration. Isn't 100% numbers. We're going to show that, but at times they need to be buffered with other, and that's why we do the interviews, not just with you folks and with staff. Last thing that I want to do is be the one that runs everybody off. Oh, yeah, I mean, just, yeah.
We'll give you a good example of that, how we addressed it.
Here was one, so we worked with merging the town of Lynn and the city of Lake Geneva in Walworth County. And working with the, one of the big things that ended up, we had all the details worked out, formula, all the dollars and cents, you know, $1.5 million, you know, fire department addition that we were putting on there, because they just plain old ran out of people. It's an interesting demographic down there. I'll just say that, of which they're a community that's very, very different. Average price for a home is 1.7 million. We were just talking about that. So it's a different perspective, and most people don't live there. So that's one of the things there. But in that, one of the things that a fairly subjective thing is, where are we going to have the annual pig roast? Because that was always done here. And it isn't just a fundraiser for the department, it's part of the fabric of the community. So, I mean, little things like that you do have to take into consideration to keep making this work, because that was, it almost got derailed because the people were afraid that they were going to lose this one time a year event. And, you know, and all of those things come into play that ultimately, you know, elected officials have to make some decisions on that, you know, the more on the subjective discretionary parts of this. But it's all things that we need to make you aware of that impact the decisions that you're going to make.
It took 3 meetings to work out. So anyway.
Trustee Murphy had 2 questions as well.
I think your answer to the last question kind of led into my first question, so I'll just move on to the next one. Given that the village and town have very different service demands geographically, operationally, and in terms of growth, how will your study account for those differences in a way that avoids a one-size-fits-all model, ensures the village can responsibly pay for the staffing and facilities our growing population requires, and still supports collaborative solutions that work for both communities?
Okay, and you have very unlike communities, rural and one that's more urban. And where some of that can be done as far as the cost model is in how you design that cost model, on how costs are appropriated between the 2 communities. That's more of the easier part. The other part is service demand, and then having the appropriate equipment on it. You know, just like Pond that we just worked out with that, very, very different communities. You know, the rural areas need water tenders and carriers. The city needed a ladder truck. And that was a little bit difficult to work out in the community. So one of the things how we were able to make that happen and work out that, well, we don't really need this and we don't want that, you know, and we're paying for this. And so so in that particular one, how we worked it out is that the tenders were something specifically needed for the rural communities. They own that apparatus. The city owned the ladder truck, and everything else was joint. Now, I will tell you that, for example, for a ladder truck, though, here's the crazy thing about those, they get credited for both communities, okay, no matter what. Okay, but that's probably the greatest difference in apparatus. But I wouldn't say that, and Chief would probably collaborate with me, I would say that there is probably we never used a ladder truck outside the city. You know, I would say maybe it gets, or excuse me, the village. It's used more probably in the village than that, but there's probably some rural places where it comes into play where that it's important there too. But those are some unique approaches that we worked out in the final end in contract negotiations, even though we're not yet talking about anything like that, but those are some of the examples that we can give you that are tools you may be able to use to move this forward.
Are there any other questions from the town or from the village?
Yeah, I had one question, a little different than the last time, because you did set it up in sort of two phases. I was looking at the relevant experience, and as you know, the town and the village share fire, but EMS is 3 municipalities. The one question I had for you is last year, or this year, you did 6 consolidations of fire and EMS. When you look at those 6, how many of those actually consolidated versus how many didn't? And when you think about Cottage Grove, how do you envision that in the study as it relates to, on page 5, when you talk about evaluate service options with either new or without partners?
Okay, and some of those are, the studies were fairly recent. I would say a lot of times it takes a year or two for some of these things to sink in and come to fruition, whether they choose to do this or not. But ultimately, it's whether it's an advantage to the community or not. One of the things that, in thinking about this ahead on and really looking at this is, and these are the specifics that we can bring you, is right now we have 2 different organizational charts and systems. What do those cost separately? And what would that third option look like if it was? And are there actually any cost savings with that? You really have to do that and be very specific, I believe, in positions, a number of positions, because in some cases, in certain consolidations, there may be, you're thinking there's more gain than there actually is. So if there is, by doing that, you know, again, being research-minded, you know, I'd really want to look at that and see what it really is. You know, is there a net gain of positions that we would need? And to a certain extent, there might be. Okay, but one of the things in it, and it also depends on demand. You know, and then I'm going to throw in one other wild card here in the end: staffing. How are you going to get where and how are you going to get the staffing, and how do we transition into this new staffing model? Okay, and I know that there are communities, some not very far away from you, that are struggling with this transition and on how we do that, because cross-staffing means that they have the training in all those disciplines in both fire and in EMS, and that it's difficult to find people, period, right now. You know, so, and then is that always something that could happen? Yeah, do I believe fire and EMS can work very well together? What it mainly does is that no matter what, a hard thing that we don't like is sharing that downtime between the 2 services is some of it, kind of sharing responsibilities and position if they can both meet their demand, okay? And we have to look at that, the utilization of the personnel, to make sure that they can meet that demand, because the question comes in, you know, well, there's a fire, they can go to a fire. If there's a medical call, they can go to that. Depends on how busy they are, how available they are to do that, and some of them. So those are all of those things that we would try to take a look at for you in that. And in some of these other communities, a little bit, yeah, they're similar, but different situations. It's a little bit easier when you're kind of starting up from scratch as far as full-time personnel in either one of those. Okay, it's a little more difficult when now, you know, and those are some of those realities of what already exists that you're talking about, that how can you transform that on departments that have been traditionally separate.
questions from the town.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm interested in learning how you incorporate AI into the work you do.
Good question. We're working with that all the time. Primarily, we use it for research. I mean, we research now, particularly when we look for comparative districts or municipalities. So we load in data that we accumulate from a certain community, and then we look for comparisons. That's very helpful. But we're like everybody else. We're struggling, to make it a real component of our analysis and a real benefit. And we're getting there. We do a lot of other things besides fire EMS. We use it a lot more in our recruitment. We do a lot of executive recruitment, our firm does. I think Matt's pretty aware of that. So we're using a lot more in that particular application. But we're slowly but surely getting, again, for that comparative analysis, I would say that's the primary where we're using it today.
And I can tell you where I've used it more so in our business is that what I've already written, I'll have AI look at it and say, how can I say this better or more concisely, things like that. But I'm cautious about using it because it's everybody's afraid of it and you can't rely on it. I will tell you, in using it for a lot of things, data analysis or for other things, it is not anywhere near perfect. And it comes up with a lot of stuff that isn't anywhere even in the ballpark or correct. So would I ever use any AI verbatim? No. How much have I used from what I've been able to extract out of it? Right now I would say maybe 30%, but is it something that I didn't know? No, I was able to find it a little bit quicker. The way I've used it more so was just like a little bit more of a hyperdrive of being able to just get a Google, that it concentrates it down a little bit quicker, to find some things. But, maybe someday it'll be there, but my opinion right now, and maybe I'm a baby boomer, a little bit old school, but I'm suspicious of it, and it's because and it isn't because I haven't used it. I've used it and I've found out what I can get.
A question for you. Were you using this other company that is going to be part of this study when you did this one in 2022?
No. Cedar Corporation, and they can jump in here too. They're still on, right? Yep. Nicole and Chris. Yeah, we just had our first experience working with them earlier this year, actually later part of last year and into this year in Menominee. And so we had a good experience working with them, and we'd like to work with them again. And this opportunity came forward with this facilities component, and we thought it was a natural for us to bring them in. We don't have that capability, and they're extremely capable, extremely qualified in what they do. So, yeah.
And we've worked with other firms in the past, but we can tell you how many people you might need, but how big of a building to put it into. How these partnerships came about with working with architectural firms, we found that it was a lot of places did it one way or another. We need a new fire station. Well, before you do that, you better find out how many people and how many fire trucks you might need to put into it. So that's kind of how this partnership developed.
That and a lot of what we were doing is we would come into a community after Tim and his team came in and did their analysis. So we thought, what a great opportunity for us to put our teams together and go after projects and provide real solutions as an integrated team rather than separately.
Save some money on the data collection piece of it.
I think we first started being familiar with your work, Corey, was when we found out you were doing some work in Waupun after we had done our work. So it was something that we learned from Waupun. Actually, Cedar Corp was doing some facility work after we had done our study. So
you think now you're set up to do a better job?
Yes, no doubt.
Well, that wasn't part of our scope.
Yeah.
Initially, we were not looking at facilities. That was not part of your original scope. So that was not something we were concerned back then because you didn't want to look at that. Obviously, now that's a more valuable component component of this to you, so that's why we brought the extra help on it.
But even with things like, we can say, ideally, it looks like, from just a pure GIS standpoint, this would be a good place to put a facility, a fire EMS station, whatever it might be. And they'll come in and look at it and say, did you look at the topography of that land? Did you look at this? They see the challenges and say, yeah, that might be the best from a response time standpoint, but it's gonna cost you so much more to try to put something in there. Just even that one particular thing, just for something simple like that.
Thanks. Kind of gonna piggyback off this thing about Cedar Corporation. Chief Lang can happen to be among some of the other folks here on the EMS Commission. And the information that the chief provides and has access to as far as coloring the dots where the calls are and so on, we already have that information. I mean, we can produce maps probably to the same extent that Cedar Corporation can provide in-house. Additionally, with regards to a location for a particular station, whatever form that might take, both the town and the village have engineers, and the village, I believe, uses MSA, no? Strand, sorry. Used to use MSA, I think, yeah. Anyway, those folks are already on retainer. For you guys, we have our own engineers also in the township, and I guess, why would we want to, or what benefit are they going to give us that we already don't have? I mean, we're not, as you said earlier, we're not two municipalities that are trying to figure out how to collaborate and create our stuff. We're already doing it, you know?
Well, and I'll let Corey jump in here, but, I mean, location and land are one piece of it. Particular space needs for a fire or EMS department, what are they really, is a little bit of a specialty niche of architecture, I think. So you still would need engineers, this is location and where, but then exactly what and what those spaces are. Like the last time we were here, I could look at and I can tell you, yeah, your facilities have some shortcomings, okay, and they're not designed up to current standards, okay? But the combination between them, us working on what the future demand is, and then them specifically designing a building around that and how fire stations are designed right now, very simple thing that, and maybe there was some correction to it, and this is related to firefighter health and safety, okay? Locker rooms for paid-on-call firefighters, and showers and personal lockers for it. Some people would say, what in the world would we do that for? Okay, and I just taught this class, it's all about cancer prevention. When firefighters get back to the station, they shouldn't go home wearing the clothes they're wearing and having all the soot and dirt from them on that. So these are kind of those specific things that these architects understand, those needs, and design buildings around like that. Certainly from that engineering standpoint, and maybe they can collaborate and streamline some of those things, but I'm just talking about actual building design things and stuff where we work together on that.
I follow up too. We were responding to the RFP. Now, if you want to provide that yourselves, I mean, we could certainly, when we scope out the final project, we can work on that and reduce the contract. I mean, it's as simple as that. But we were responsive to the RFP. The RFP requested those services. So it's simple. If you don't want them, we can adjust it accordingly.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of Tim's comment a little bit, designing a fire station is much different than any other building. It's about how the building's used, the functionality. It comes down to even how we look at the number of steps as you get from your dorms to the apparatus bay. And, to piggyback off of Kevin, how you're looking at this as a team. Yes, you could separate this contract out, but we have the proven experience working together, and I think we can provide a great product by doing that, and give you a better direction, both at the town and the village.
Questions from our chiefs?
You fellas get an extra question out of me. You referenced the village and town of Cottage Grove in all of the documentation. Deer Grove EMS represents 5 total communities and Cottage Grove Fire represents 3. Will your study involve at least discussions with our third partner community in the IGA? Or were you planning on just the 2 Cottage Groves?
I would say I don't know how we couldn't have some discussion with that, because if we'd recommend, how would that fit into something different? You know, if we're looking at that, certainly needs to be taken into consideration with it. So are there other ways of accomplishing that, and still keeping them involved? What would happen if they didn't? You know, again, that first do no harm, you know, looking at what that could potentially do or not do.
Yeah, the second one is probably a question for both you and Cedar Corp. And it would be specificity about a facility's location. Between Chief Archibald and I, we can relatively predict when we believe we might need more resources and where we think might be the best for us. But you're subject matter experts between yourselves and Cedar. Will the recommendations have some specificity to it, or will it be generally put a building over there?
I'll let Cedar Corp address it. Can you, Corey or Chris, or even?
Yes, I'll jump in front of that one. So the GIS analysis will give us some general locations, but we have to take it a step further, right? Because at the end of all these recommendations has to come a cost component. So we have to look at what properties are available and then determine, is that the best option? Now, being you maybe have some ideas where you think it should go, maybe you have some thoughts on land ownership and acquisition. There's always that part of the discussion that becomes part of the answer and part of the solution. But there might be a couple alternatives we evaluate, and then, you know, the timeline, it's going to be timeline, budget, and to come up with that final recommendation.
Chief, you're the local experts, and so we have to work hand in glove with you. I mean, you know, your boots on the ground, you're right here every day. We might be some technical experts from the outside, but we have to work hand in glove with you. So it's going to be, it's always a really good discussion when we get to these points in the study. So, yep.
I think the keynote to that, though, is I'm a technical expert of my department. I'm not a technical expert of the village of Cottage Grove or the town of Cottage Grove. There's some of those people in this room that hopefully you plan to involve in the process as well. It leads into my next question of, are you willing to use other than DOA data for population projections? I understand you want to use DOA data because it's proven, and it's the standard for some places, but I think we can show locally that it's very inaccurate. So would you, through your projections, would you use not only DOA but also local data to make projections for population and potential effects on response?
Yeah, I would say that your local data is much better than what DOA has right now, and the thought and expense that you put together in doing that, because I mean they apply some general rules to certain places, and that's a little bit different than what's happening here. I mean, case in point, looking back at it, where we thought it was going to be, or where they said it was going to be 3 years ago, we can see that that's not the particular case. And I saw part of that as I was driving into town from the north here tonight, why that's happening. So definitely, yeah, using that local data is probably more important.
The only question I got, are there any other resources that you are using for, like, outside subject matter experts other than Cedar for the project? And if so, do you provide those, or is it just in-house with you guys?
It's in-house and the folks that are working for Cedar. So all those folks working on this project, or be all of the staff potentially from PA, not necessarily just fire and EMS. It's just say like looking at the growth and stuff, and I might say to Kevin, hey, you know, from a more of a development planning standpoint, you know, let's take a look at this. So that would be it. But we would cite that where that came from, you know, that it wasn't just, you know, where Tim thought, you know, this or something like that, you know. But again, I think that getting that information from you is going to be really important moving forward, because, you know, and there's insight. And then going back to a little bit what Chief was talking about, like properties and availability, okay? And that's a sensitive subject that you have to be very careful with that. But, you know, we might look and say, this is the best place to put a fire station. And one of it would be like City of Lake Geneva looked at that, wow, there's all this vacant land right here. You know, yeah, that was a golf course. Well, but it's in a land conservancy of, you're not going to touch that for the next 100 years, and there's no way in the world you're going to be able to do that. You know, so things like that are very, there's a property, it's like it would really go well here. Well, that's never going away. Those kind of things have to be brought into it, and those are the subjective things, excuse me, that we have to get from you.
Let me ask, answer too. That's a good question, Chief. The one thing I would say is we have about 18 or 20 of us at PA, and I was just thinking about this the other day. We have a new consultant. His name is Clint Gridley. I don't know if you know Clint. He was in Cedarburg for a while. He was the city administrator up in Woodbury, Minnesota, fastest growing city. It's right over the border as you come across the St. Croix into Minnesota. Went from about 10,000 to 80,000 in about 15 years, 20 years. He's one of our consultants now. He's currently working in Grafton. I've thought about him, bringing him into a place like this because he's experienced that rapid growth, and he can, from experience, he's got some of that fire, what happened with the fire EMS services in that particular community and how that evolved over time. So he would bring a unique perspective. We could bring somebody like him in. So that we will, depending on what we learn from all of you, we would bring in those resources that we have internally as much as we could. So.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Thank you for taking the time to come and visit us tonight and share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cedarburg.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll move on to number 6, which is entering into a closed session to establish negotiating parameters in terms of contract for services regarding fire and EMS study. So I'll make a motion that the Village of Cottage Grove Village Board and the Town of Cottage Grove Board of Supervisors enter into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, paren 1, paren E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Is there a second? Second by Anders.
Can I speak to the motion? I guess I was hoping that we would maybe have a more broad discussion in open session in terms of just if we're moving forward, and then leave any sort of negotiating kind of things for closed.
And when you decide whether to go into close, we should do separate votes of both bodies, motions and votes. But yes, that's, we've talked a little bit recently about how the, I wouldn't say the rules have changed, but they've been more clarified to us by the courts. We should, anything that's not related to negotiating the actual contract with these entities, we should do an open session, so we can just hold that motion and.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. We can hold the motion. Where would you like to start? So I'll say I think that the reason for doing the RFP, which again, if you go through my memo and the history of it, this has been a year in the making. But it's really important to consider, obviously, hiring a consultant. I know that we can provide a lot of data internally, and we will do that, but an unbiased approach to, coming up with ultimate decisions that then lands on the different boards. We're all coming at it from different angles, which is great. We all serve have different interests that we're protecting, and having that unbiased approach from having a consultant is really important in making sure that we're making the appropriate decisions in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, since we've been involved in
in reviewing the scope and watching this happen, that really the look backward in this case as compared to the 22 is largely driven by the fact that the assumptions made didn't really play out, especially in terms of growth. And that study did not include a set of facilities recommendations. So as you talk through this, it's not that we're going to do this every 3 years. It's that some of the information that was used has proven to be incorrect in terms of growth, and this is adding what we understand to be the more pressing discussion point, which is if we're going to keep growing, where do we put everybody in that facilities study part? So that was not part of the 22 study.
So I, was one of the proponents of going to a study, but unfortunately, I think Wisconsin Policy Forum talked themselves out of a job, because as I sat and I listened to their presentation when they went over the common challenges, we're not having those challenges, right? We're not missing calls. We're not, having recruitment retention challenges. So that really got me thinking that I'm not sure that we necessarily need to right now. The other piece is they talked about the common recommendations, and I'm kind of concerned that we're going to get kind of the same sort of answer Sun Prairie received. And I guess, and I say Sun Prairie because I think I have a unique perspective that I was on the Sun Prairie City Council prior to moving to Cottage Grove, and so that was about 2003. And 2004 is when we took our EMS to full-time. And it was right around then that we started having the conversation about our volunteer fire department, and whether or not, we looked at our comp plan and the different things, the Costco area, all of those things. And we started having those conversations back in 2003, but it was quite the gap between when we had those conversations and when Sun Prairie Volunteer Fire Department put on their first 4-person crew, which was 2012. And then they didn't merge fire and EMS until January of 2024. So I'm thinking, like, in many ways we're kind of walking down the same path that they walked, especially in the village, maybe not so much in the town. But the need isn't as emergent to me on the staffing operational side. I do think that, I might be open to contracting with Cedar Grove for a facility look at that was $11,000 when we broke that out, because I think we also have to give them some information as to, how do we solve for the north side of the interstate? And I don't think those are conversations that we've really had yet, but trying to find a location for a village department right now, I feel like is a little bit of a moving target, because we have annexation petitions coming to us. There are different plans. We're working through our comp plan, so it might be premature to try to nail that down. But I guess I would be more apt to just look at a facility study with Cedar Grove than the whole package. There's also a cost savings to that. But those are my observations.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for? You seem to be the one that was a proponent of this sort of happening. Just explain to me what you're looking for.
Well, currently we have a building that houses 2 full-time paramedics and a full-time ambulance, along with the facilities with the fire department. Our bays have vehicles in all of them. We have a future that predicts that we'll need additional resources, whether it be starting off with a part-time ambulance. We have to have a place to put that vehicle. Currently in Cottage Grove, we have nowhere to place another ambulance because of the confines of the station. So this look was to ask the question, by statistically speaking, of whichever firm is chosen to help us guide when those transitions happen, and then tell us what needs to happen with either the current facility or with a potential satellite facility. Sure, we can make statements to say, hey, just toss a couple garage bays on the current station, gets us our space, we're good. But that doesn't satisfy the needs of the community moving into the future. That fixes the problem in the immediate, probably to cost more in the future when you do in fact need more living capabilities for expanding departments.
But you're really looking, both of you, is to get to an accident or a fire quickly.
Yeah,
I mean,
we're looking
so
to
that's where this whole over the freeway thing started.
Well, the over the freeway thing started with development over the freeway, first thing. And the second thing was in 2022, a recommendation was to help cover the north side of the village, that there might need to be some facility on that end of town. As part of the fire portion of the study, just a very blanket recommendation. There was no facilities recommendation in any portion of the EMS part of the study.
Yeah, right.
So we're looking towards the future. We're good now. We believe we have good governance, a good relationship with our municipalities, good funding sources, good staff, good equipment today. But as the communities grow, and all of them are, we'll need more, and potentially more in a different spot to help us respond effectively, not only on the fire department side, or excuse me, EMS side, but potentially on the fire department side, largely because of their response model. Not to mention, as the community grows, it does take time to get from one side to the other.
But both of you want, how can I say it? To go for this building if we need it, or add on to where we're at. But it's all about getting to the accident, or like I said, the fire as quick as possible, right? Isn't that what it's really about? Or
I think the better answer to your statement, Mike, is that we want to ensure that we're providing the services to the community that the community desires. And a timely response is something that I would assume the community members desire.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me both of you know already what we need.
Well, we need something.
You know, but you're looking for somebody else to back you, basically.
We're looking for the uninterested third party that can gather a bunch of information from sources that we can't. Certainly we could. It would just take more time and more technology than we have access to. But Aaron Ruth has development access that we could probably get a hold of. Work with Matt for population projections and all those other things. But this is an uninterested third party that would look at those things, put them into a wonderful format for us to evaluate, and then make decisions on from there.
That the way you feel, other chiefy?
Yeah, I would tend to agree that we're gonna, as the municipalities continue to grow, there's gonna be a need for more resources on both parts. And the current station, we're full right now. You know, I don't know, at some point, the fire department isn't gonna be able to sustain an all-volunteer model. And that's not just me trying to say like we should hire a bunch of people right now or anything like that. I don't know what the year looks like for that, when that's gonna happen. That's all gonna be based on growth. My preference would be that we stay how we are as long as we can, because that saves both municipalities quite a bit of money. But as the communities continue to grow, responding on a one station on the south end of town, it does take quite a while to get to the north end of town. And as municipalities spread further to the north, it's gonna take longer to get further to the north. And as population increases, there's more traffic on the roads to get responders to the south end of the station, south end of town, to get to the trucks, to head north, to go back to the calls. So at some point, we're gonna have to grow. And whether that means remodeling the current station to add on a couple bays, I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, you know. But as Chief Lang said, in the 2022 study, it did say that at some point you're gonna have to address adding another station somewhere on the north end of town to address growth. And part of that's based on the ISO standard that PAA was referencing, because your station can't be more than X amount of distance from your residence. So we could take a stab at it and say, we think it should be here, but I guess I don't want to be the person that says, put your fire station right here, and then 10 years from now, it's in the complete wrong area, because then everyone's gonna go, well, why did we put the fire station there? That was a terrible idea. Well, that's not my area of expertise, so I'd rather have somebody tell us where that should be and can use the information that they normally use to make those facts, I guess. So.
I mean, you've touched a little bit on organizational changes are likely going to be happening at some point. We've already gone to paid per call. Eventually it'll go to paid on call. Like, we've had those conversations too, and like I know that there's been discussion about moving to full-time chief in the next couple of years as well. So there's organizational changes that are going to have to be integrated into long-term planning as well. And so I think we can't just, we need to reset the base numbers, population growth, the calls for service, all of those things that, you know, take a look backwards, a slight look backwards, but then a bigger look forward into how we can, you know, best navigate these changes and plan for facilities in the future.
Can I ask a follow-up to that, Cindy? Do we have the expertise within the department to walk us through those next steps? And I know that's kind of what Sun Prairie did, right? You start with all volunteers, then you go to the one crew, and then, you know, so on and so forth. Do we have the expertise to be able to kind of at least walk us through those transitions in terms of staffing, if we can provide the expertise on the facility side? Because I think, you know, you both have hit on it. I think it's the northern half of BB that becomes a challenge for response. So could it be kind of a partner effort?
I don't know that I'm going to specifically answer to the question the way you ask it. But I think we're trying to maybe only go with one half of a quote that was an all-inclusive quote. I don't know that Cedar Corp can provide us the information that we would want to get from them without getting the information from PAA or from some other source first. So they would need some of the information that was going to be acquired in kind of a two-phased component of PAA's proposals to do their analysis while partnering with Cedar to do the facilities and response analysis. As far as my transition for my department, it would be finding how we navigate through a number of things. What do we need for resources? How does that fit into the budget? Where do we get them? Where do we put them? And yet, certainly, yes, we could do that. And as far as the fire department, I would assume Nick will answer very similar.
Yeah, I mean, we're already we're using the benchmarks that PAA gave us in the first study. And that's basically their benchmarks were based on response time to incidents and following the NFPA standard for a volunteer model. As you see, you know, more instances where you're not meeting those benchmarks, then that's where you start proposing moving to the next model of, like, right now we're talking about paid per call, and that's not because we're not hitting the benchmarks. We're easily hitting those right now, but we're trying to keep recruitment up and keep the number of volunteers up right now and incentivize them to come down, because it kind of comes in peaks and valleys for volunteers, you know. With this not being their career, this is like, we always put it as a priority of your family comes first, then your job, and then us. So if any one of those two things change, then the fire department is always the one that gets cut. So, you know, if your job transfers you across the country, then you don't have time to come, you're obviously not gonna be around to be a volunteer firefighter for us. Or if your family commitments change, you have a kid, then most people don't have time to have a newborn and be on a volunteer fire department because of the time commitment. So we see our memberships go, I mean, at one point last year, I think we were at 48 members. We were talking about doing a wait list. And then a couple months ago, we were down to 36 or 37, and now we're back up to 43. So it's kind of like a roller coaster, and one of the plans for paid per call was to try and incentivize people to join, and maybe it would help compete with some of the side things that would make them want to come down and join the department, because now it's not just you're coming down here and sacrificing your time and not really getting anything other than community service out of it, I guess. But as we start seeing recruitment or numbers drop off and call response times suffer, we're going to be talking about moving to the next model of, should it be a paid on call where people are paid to be at the station, or is it going to need to be something more than that?
Thank you. It kind of sounds like you're on top of those transitions and you both know the needs that you have. Chief Lang, don't you put together in our EMS packets, like, I think you call it a heat map, but in essence, aren't you kind of reviewing that call data and the response times and already have that put together?
Yeah, the heat map is just the darker the color, the more calls were in that particular range. It doesn't reference response times at all. I give response time statistics, but that's as a median and a 90th fractile. The map that you saw from Cedar Corp showed what it would look like to respond in minutes from a location to other communities, and they would be able, I can get that information, but I can't do that. I have partners at Dane County Emergency Management that would be able to give those to us, that would be able to tell us how we get, not only for EMS, but for fire, how we get the best saturated coverage from different locations to show whatever response time metric we want to meet within the municipality. I think a recruitment and retention thing to note is not only is our building full. Right now, if one of Chief Archibald's volunteers wanted to, say, hang out at the station, they have a little bit of a room upstairs, but that's kind of all they have. The building, to look towards the future, will need some of those adjustments as well. Not just with housing for paramedics. So there's more creature comfort retention type things that could help with recruiting for the fire department in the future, or even with our volunteer model.
So as I listen to all this, the one thing that just resonates with me is, you know, begin with the end in mind. And so what are we trying to solve for immediately, right? Space, you've talked about space. So space for a third ambulance does not exist in the emergency services buildings we know today. And then there's this notion of response times. And response times, as we grow, particularly to the north, because the station is on the south side, that becomes an issue. But I think, Nick, Chief Archibald, you said that we're meeting response times right now. And I think as we look at the response times that you've got, the question is, which one's going to trigger first? Needing that third ambulance or the response time issue and needing a north station?
I think
that's a critical question.
Add on to that there's a long list of capital, needs of the current ESB, and where do we put where are we putting our efforts then? Where are we putting our money towards renovating ESB, adding a third bay, or how does that look versus building another station plus different types of adjustments at ESB? What does that look like?
You build a new fire and EMS station, right? We're going to need more equipment, because if you don't have equipment there, I mean, it's
Again,
exponential.
also like depends on service models that you have.
Absolutely.
And so it's all integrated and it needs to be studied efficiently and effectively in an unbiased way. And if we want that information by summer, going with a consultant to do start to finish a proper study with recommendations is the way to go.
Yeah, this all was initiated from the capital improvement plan to put in their placeholders for certain levels of activity with anticipated outcomes. Saying that we think a study might cost this much and we should do it in this time period with hoping to be able to get everything approved and constructed by a certain time. I guess ask Chief Gary how long it takes to build a building. We're not talking about a full police department, but you still have that whole process to go through, not only of site selection, site procurement, building design, funding, then actual construction. And Peter, who you've said have built quite a few things, you know that those things just can't happen. So that's where this discussion it grew from there, that we needed someone to tell us some of the information that could be consumable by everyone and agreed upon, that it'll create a future structure for us and a future timeline to walk.
Yeah, and I think when you think about the phases, right, a third ambulance, we need a home for it. Can we respond? How much can the village grow and still have adequate or acceptable response times? The other thing is with fire department, we don't know when we're going to possibly go into some paid per call staff. When that happens, we need sleeping quarters. So right now, the existing EMS building is not acceptable for that, right? And so when I think about, at what point, how much does the village need to grow in terms of area before we would not be able to take the option of adding on to the basement of the EMS or the emergency service building, provide sleeping quarters and a potential future home for an ambulance, and then reserve the sleeping quarters upstairs for fire? I mean, to me, that could be something that could be 20 years out. That, and I guess the only thing I would want the consultants to tell us is, from a footprint, how much bigger would we be allowed to grow before that's not an acceptable solution? And I think that's certainly a significantly lower cost option for us to pursue.
I would say that's why we have experts to tell us that.
Yeah, but I say the scope is not crafted in that way. Never once did I see footprint of the village and response times as a driver for all the rest of the analysis. That's kind of my point. And I think, again, it goes back to beginning with the end in mind. We could just, when I look at what we sent them as far as an RFP and what we got back for proposals, it's a little squishy as it relates to, if that's what we want, we're not that specific.
I'll just jump in real quick. If the responses to the RFP, if the majority of decision makers believe that those responses weren't consistent with the request, that's definitely something we should talk about, because from a contract standpoint, there might have been, if that's the case, there might be a need for clarity as to what the driving forces are. But I do think that I've heard, just sitting here listening, I've heard there's not a particular consensus on how to cut that scope, but I have heard people say we probably don't need as much look back other than to just kind of catch up, and it's really about thinking forward. I think it seems like everyone's fairly in agreement on that. But in terms of that scope, if they didn't provide a proposal that's consistent with the RFP, if you all don't believe that, then that would be something we'd want to work through with them.
I guess my only question is, and I think, Mike, you said it, right? Do we know kind of a really good lead option, and should that be analyzed for validity, versus do we just take a step back and just have at it in a very general sense? And the more specific we are, the better the results we're going to get, and that's my only point.
I do think that, Trustee Dahl, the growth, just the footprint growth, is probably not going to be a sufficient parameter. But the idea is, how much more service do we need before it's not enough, and where Just growth alone in terms of footprint might kind of depend on what kind of growth that is and how much is needed, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think, Larry, if what we feel, and I'm just throwing this out there, right? The lowest cost option for both communities, if it's just cost, because service is another key piece, but making modifications to the ESB building to set us up for 30 ambulance and potentially staffing paid per call when that happens on the fire department is the lowest cost. The question is, I think what you said, Larry, and I don't know who said area. If area is not the only thing, there's other elements of at what point does that not solve the needs for the two municipalities? And that would be a question I would want answered, because that's certainly a cleaner path to addressing some of the issues.
And I guess maybe I read something differently than you do, Peter, but it says in 4 on page 10 of PAA study, only because that's the one that I had open that I could look at. It says develop a timeline for future new facilities or expansion renovation of the current facility. Recommend future site locations for facilities if applicable after analysis. Complete a comprehensive space need analysis along with a projected implementation plan. That to me sounds specific. I don't know if it sounds specific to you though.
I guess, it goes back to what Mike said, right? If we feel like we've got a good lead option that we should laser in on, and again, I don't disagree, Chief Lang. I mean, if we want to take a step back and have a little bit more generic approach, and that's kind of what that is, I think that's fine. It's just the amount of time and money we're going to spend, and if we do believe that we've got an option, because from a capital perspective, a new facility is going to be astronomically more expensive than modifying the existing facility for the needs. But if that does not solve the needs for 15, 20 years, then I don't believe that's an option.
Yeah, I would agree that it's probably double to build a new facility as compared to renovating, but does that meet the needs and desires of the community?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah, I think their study could be, we could ask them to be twofold. Give us a quick analysis of what a renovation might look like and where you would recommend the additional facility to be.
Yeah, I mean, if there's consensus that is a reasonable option that could last for 15, 20 years, depending on service, I would prefer us to look at that. And if that is not going to solve the needs, then we expand the scope. That's what I would suggest.
And I'm going to, one of my roles is to help to condense this, so that's why I keep jumping in and communicate it. So what I heard was that to determine whether it will be sufficient for 10 or 15 years requires a review of more than just that building. That's what I heard from you and from the consultants, that it requires an analysis of these parameters to say, I know we could do, let me give you an example. I think they could say, you can do this addition, this remodeling, you could create this much space for X, Y, and Z, and you could do this many more calls out of that building, but it doesn't take into account whether that's coming from the appropriate spot, and that I've been struggling. That's what I'm trying to do here, is to figure out if you were going to pull apart, what would we say? And I guess I'm struggling to see how you would pull it apart, because it seems to me that you need the information to know whether we know what we could do out of that. We could find out quickly. I agree with Peter. We could really find out quickly how much we could add to that building and what we could do out of it, but I think that's only half the question.
And I think from the fire component too is, we know as we grow, any additional growth north, we're gonna wanna know, at least long-term, what the plan is for fire service. So having that plan would be nice, instead of, development proposals coming in and then not knowing. Because there's already lots of developers starting to poke around north of Amazon.
Heidi, it looks like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just don't want to, it's kind of a chicken or egg. Does the facility location fit our needs? Sure, there's space there to expand, but has been talked about, is that in the right location? So we're talking about a potentially, even just an addition and remodel, it's in the millions. So are we gonna, be totally confident spending millions of dollars if we don't know if that's in the right location for the future. And so how do we know that that's the right location without doing the other piece of the study? So, you know, spending 30 or 40,000 to be confident that we're in the right spot, spending potentially millions of dollars, seems like to have that analysis and know that that's the right spot for the future seems like some due diligence that is worth spending money on, so we can meet our, you know, standards of response time.
Totally agree. My only point was the capital, several $1 million to modify EMS, or the current emergency services building. To build another building and to equip that building is gonna be in the tens of millions. That's my only point.
And you're gonna have to build it twice as big as what you're gonna need in 20 years.
Exactly. And if that's what we need, I get it, but it's gonna be a step function.
But I don't think we want to shortchange ourselves today by reducing the scope. I know the village, just to remind us all, budgeted 40,000 for the study. It came in at 30. Cameron probably has the exact numbers. I think the difference between the two was like $87.
So I have a question. We've talked a lot about data points and analysis, and I don't know, maybe I'm not looking at this as well as I should be, but I kind of feel like one of our most important data points is sitting right here in this room, and I feel like we're kind of talking over the fire chief and just saying, you know, point blank, you know, what are your thoughts versus, you know, obviously the village is going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to grow north. I mean, we know that's coming in the very near future. But, you know, let's just imagine for a moment that we, you had all of the options and resources at your fingertips. Right now, looking ahead in 2-3 years, what is your input? Do you think that we're just slapping a Band-Aid on a building that we would be remodeling, and as the group has mentioned here, then we're going to be spending even more money down the road? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I guess I don't know what to say, because, yeah, you could remodel the current building, but as you continue to grow to the north, you're still going to have the response time question that we talked about, where responders are coming from the village and the town, driving to the station, and then they're driving back to the north. That takes a long time, especially with the congestion, the traffic that you have right now. As you continue to grow, it's going to get worse. Now, if you changed your model, like you've suggested, like there's been the suggestion that if you change the model so it's not a volunteer service anymore, and you had paid on call where they're at the station, then obviously you're going to cut that response time down, because there's not people driving from their house to the station to get the truck to drive back north. They're just leaving the station and going north. So it really depends on what model you're looking at for the future of the fire department and how soon you want to move to a different model. The problem is, when you move to a different model, it affects recruitment and retention. And, you know, when you move to, say, a paid on call or a partial full-time staff where there's a staffed engine and then you're using volunteers, you tend to lose a lot of volunteers, because what ends up happening is they go, well, why would I get out of bed? There's a staffed engine down there. Why would I get out of bed at 3 a.m.? Because that engine's going to handle that call. So why should I wake up for this call? Why should I go through all this stuff because there's a crew that's getting paid to do that job? Why would I go do that? So it's a delicate balance. I'm not saying that that's going to happen, and obviously you're probably not going to go right to a full-time, full-engined crew, because that's significant cost. You're talking at least 12 staff just to staff an engine, 365, because you have 3 different shifts. Plus, you're going to have to hire extras for vacation and sick time, and then probably a career chief to run that. So you're talking 16, 17 full-time staff overnight. You're talking over $1 million in staff, probably closer to 2 with benefits. So that's a lot of cost to inflict really quickly. So I'm guessing that you're gonna go more to like a paid on call where you try to minimize some of that cost. And, you know, but then you're still dealing with recruitment and retention by driving out some of the volunteers, so.
Yeah, and I feel like you're a great expert. You're a great advocate for the fire department. You put in just you and fire chief. You put in so much time into making sure this is a functional department, and I feel like your expertise and your vision and your knowledge is really important to tap into and consider as well when we're talking about all these different models. So thank you.
All right, Cameron, are you piecing out, or do you have a question or a comment?
Just a comment.
Okay.
So I know earlier, Paula, you had mentioned public safety impact fee. We would need the operational component to utilize this study to take that to the finish line. So I just want to make sure our board was at least aware that you need both the operating and capital to put together in the feasibility to get that. So I didn't want to cut that and then have to kind of redo that as a second step as we evaluate that potential impact fee for that second asset or possible addition, because they'll look at everything from the additional equipment that they need, the first responding equipment and additional apparatus that all goes into that formula for that second piece of a facility. And then secondly, you know, I know all the communities are dealing with levy limits, and so the more data we have in front of us as we make those transitions to pay per call to paid on call to career, so we can make sure we're satisfying our needs first and planning for those needs, especially, you know, when the village goes through the financial management plan. That helps us strategically plan for addition of staffing and make sure that we're limiting any spikes in the mill rate. So that's how I would utilize in my capacity the results of the study, is to make sure and to avoid, to the extent of possible, those spikes in the levy.
And can you just clarify, Cameron, this would be an additional public safety impact fee separate from the one that we're talking about with the police department, correct?
Correct. So if the fire study came back and said we would recommend going and getting an architect in 2028 and possible construction 2029, 2030, I would recommend, if you would go forward with the impact fee, that we could start that collection process. If they're saying, well, 2032 to 2035, I'd say, okay, well, we don't want to we want to make sure we're not going to have to refund impact fees collected if the governing body chooses.
Everybody's been talking about refurbing the existing fire station or building new. How about actually, if you think very, very hard on this, having to spend money for both? Because of the fact that if you build a new station, wherever that may be, I'm sure it would have sufficient quarters for paid on call, full-time on staff, or same way with fire and EMS. However, why would you go ahead and not do anything back at the original station? Because of the fact, at some point, even if there isn't a third ambulance up at the new place, when you start pulling apparatus out of the old station, you've got empty bays, okay? So there's places to park and potentially, you know, a third ambulance. I'm not saying that that's how you're gonna do it, chief, or anything, but there's gonna be empty space. Plus the fact that, why would you not have paid per call or paid on call staff at the main station and only up at the north side, or however this is actually gonna work out? So this is gonna be probably a double expense versus one or the other.
Chairman Anders, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's what we were looking at a few years ago. The new station, in all likelihood, would be, you know, unless a future study would suggest differently, would likely be a satellite station. We looked at 2 bays that would run completely through where you could fit one ladder truck and up to 2 ambulances. So it would be likely that at some point in the future, whenever that's needed, and then likely also, whatever modifications we can make to improve Station 1.
I think one thing,
Can you turn your microphone on? Sorry.
Hello? Am I there? We're not talking about money, but, this is a lot of dream in a way, because I know you guys have quite a debt now, and I don't think you want to go any farther in debt. And, we're a lot smaller, and you're the game changer with the money, because you pay a lot more than we do in Deerfield or wherever. And my opinion a little bit, being I've lived here quite a while, and that I just think sometimes you just got to stop for a little bit and don't do anything more. Just get finances in better shape, and then we can talk really serious about the stuff that's going on. Because I think we're, with our share, what we're paying and what it's based on, we're there to do whatever we can do. You guys got the big ball to carry, and I think that's something you people have to really keep looking at, because I know it's my opinion. I think your debt is very serious. That's all.
I would just, I keep going back and forth because, like, Cameron, you made a good point about the public safety impact fee, which I'm a proponent of. So, like, I keep flopping back and forth, and it's hard. But I guess no matter where we come to a decision, I think one of the things that we just have to be really mindful of is throughout the process is open communication, particularly with our volunteer fire department, because I worry about the strain that it puts on the volunteers. And like Chief said, as you start moving to, paid on-call and that sort of thing, it can have even more effects. And so I think, if we look at this through a lens of trying to preserve our volunteer fire department for as long as possible, both from a cultural aspect, as they said, but also from a fiscal aspect, if we can keep that in mind, I think, and have that be the lens that we look through this, then I'd be more in favor of some of these, of the study and such. So, one of the proposals, Wisconsin Policy Forum, mentioned like a work group that would be between like elected officials and, the chiefs and such. And that's something that I have interest in serving on. Because I almost feel like a lot of this is incumbent on us to solve for some of these things in terms of like setting our future vision for, okay, how much are we going to expand to the north? How much are we going to expand to the east? Because that's going to play a role in any kind of future too. So I'm kind of stuck in the middle. I don't know.
I think I agree a lot with those comments. I think that's what we all bring to the table when they, are doing their data collection, is that we give them those perspectives and make sure that they understand that culture is very important and these are concerns, and we want to, put off, as many big changes as long as we can, and being respectful of, still what is needed and, the metrics that need to be hit by everyone. To your point about, the village being in financial ruin, that point is not well taken. I think, we have a financial director sitting back there that can speak very well to, our current debt capacity, what we can handle. We do have a growing population. We do have growing service needs, and this is something that is very important for the village to stay on top of, and we can't just pause and just take a breather. We need to continue to, do the hard work to make sure that we are going to meet the needs today and in the future. Larry.
So one other thing to keep in mind is that I think the discussion about what the focus should be for a study has been very good tonight. They can go back, and if they're not on listening, they can go back and listen to that. I think what they'll find, like I was sitting here trying to think if I was the consultant, and I was hired, what would I do now following this discussion? And I know the first thing that I would do is I would listen to every point everyone made and say, there's some different priorities amongst the group, but they all kind of lead in the same direction. And there's some things that aren't priorities, right? I don't think I've heard anyone say it's a priority to Chair Anders' point, to go back and figure out if the funding formula right now is, right? I've heard everyone talk about how do we figure out what to do, not even what to necessarily do right now, but what to do next and what to plan for. So this discussion also instructs the scope of what they'll actually spend their time on and what we'll expect to see from them, whoever you choose if you move forward. So I think that's important to keep in mind too. We don't read their proposals and then put it in a black box and get something out. They're going to meet with every one of you and the chiefs and other staff, so.
Any other comments on the two consultants and the RFP process, et cetera? Or should we move into closed session?
I didn't have to be reminded. The only reason we would go into closed session, I think, at this point is if we were going to talk about how we're going to negotiate the agreement. And I don't know that.
Is there any interest from the two boards to go into closed session or decisions?
Just like Attorney Konopacki just had first said, the funding mechanisms that PAA was very, again, they were very, very upfront about it. I think it's personally, and I'm gonna be very blunt about it, it's a waste of time. Absolutely a total waste of time to have them come and tell us how we should fund everything. I mean, between us, as I said before, things are working good. I prayed to the Lord for a long time to finally get where we're at right now, and I'm happy, and I think the rest of my board shares my same thoughts, is that if it's not fixed or broken, let's not try and fix it. And let's take that part of the RFP, for the study off the table. I don't care if it saves us $500, a buck's a buck in my mind. And I don't know if anybody else has any other personal thoughts on any other components of what is being proposed here or not.
If that is something we do want to,
Yeah.
if the boards agree to just remove that look from the
Yeah,
study, is that something we
and
can just give
unfortunately,
direction on?
I don't think it'll result in a change in, and plus, now that they've both submitted dollars, we start to get into it's like opening a sealed bid and knowing, I don't think it's going to change the money. I think the focus should be on those things, is to say, unless you turn over something that we are somehow missing, that it's broken, that's not where you should be spending your time. And that's direction we would give them as to how they would proceed. Just, we don't need the first 4 paragraphs to be about the funding structure, right? It's got to be about the things that the chiefs talked about that they're concerned about into the future, and how do we better understand what the options are related to that. I think I've heard everybody agree with Chairman on that.
The other thing that PAA also talked about was consolidation. And I don't know that the two chiefs have any interest in it. We have great paramedics, we have great firefighters, and why muddy the waters? I mean, at this particular point in time, the service model that we have 2 separate departments. Again, I mean, we're just taking just some of the stuff out, the fluff, and just putting these folks on the straight and narrow as far as facilities and locations and all that kind of stuff. Those are the kinds of things that.
Yeah, in the short term, I completely agree with you. But I think when you think about 5, 10, 15 years down the road, consolidating departments is possibly something that makes sense for both communities. I don't know, but unless you look at it, you don't know. And when I think about facilities that I have where I've got multiple leaders in it, it gets a little difficult to drive some of the decisions that need to be made. And so consolidation in the long term, I personally believe is something that needs to be considered. And again, it's not in the near term and nothing's broken right now, so I agree with you 100%.
But what people come up with as far as a study or a recommendation now is probably not going to be valid 15 years from now.
Then why do it?
And when I
None
see-
of us, none of us are going to, most of us are not going to be here in 15 years, okay? So I would, that would be a first. If you were village president 15 years from now. But what I'm saying is that there are too many steps to be taken. We're not a full-time or even paid fire department yet. You know, our paramedics, I don't know, I don't know that they want to become firefighters and go out with a hose and when they're not fighting what I'm saying is, I guess, is that at this stage, I think it's premature for us to be looking at a recommendation whether or not they consolidate.
Yeah,
But
no,
it
my only
isn't-
thought is if you're going to build a building, that things change. I'm sorry, Cindy.
No, I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, so
But
if
if you're
we're
gonna house
gonna,
both,
But we're
if
talking
parking's though-
about facilities investments that are happening now, and we're talking about facility investment of a potential new satellite station or whatever we're gonna call it in 2030, 2031, whatever we have in the financial management plan. We need a retrospective look at the work that has been done. We can absolutely give clear direction to the firm that we choose to, on exactly what they should be looking at and moving forward. But we need a review of the prior literature. We need to move forward with studies, and studies evolve over time. We saw that from the study from 3 years ago. We're already to the point where we need a new study. We need to continue moving on, and boards in the future are going to have the exact same conversations that we're having today. Eric.
Yeah, I'll add big red trucks are cool. But knowing my industry and enough about the fire industry, I'm pretty certain that we could say that there isn't much to be gained from a consolidation that we don't have currently, even in the future. When you look at EMS, there's many fire-based EMS departments that wish that the EMS wasn't on a part of the fire department. So if that got looked at, I would welcome the extra input and the extra knowledge. I don't see a recommendation coming in to say that you guys need to consolidate now or in 10 years or 15 years. A comment that I made in a different discussion was, we're talking about timing about all this, and we're never gonna know if we make adjustments early because we made them, but we're certainly gonna know if we make adjustments to our response too late. So unfortunately, I understand it does involve tax dollars and community funding and people's own personal budgets, but we do hope and try to look out for the best interest of the communities as a whole, and be ahead of those things rather than have something tragic happen and have to say, sorry, we didn't see that coming.
I think that's a great point to end on. So zip it, Larry. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
In having read a number of these studies in different communities, typically what you won't see is do this tomorrow when you're set, when you're in a situation where things are working. But what you will see is, like, for instance, if they say, if you grow, maybe they'll say, for now, there's renovations and a little bit of expansion here. But after that, we would anticipate the growth has gone far enough north that adding more there doesn't make as much sense as going north. And when you get to the point where you're ready to take that next big step years down the road, then you reevaluate whether that's the right step. In other words, is there some consolidation opportunity that's presenting itself in that period of time? You as you said, you stop for a second and you say, we've been on this path, but is it still the right move? But you do that at the time. But I think it's helpful to say, we've got, the village has land a small parcel that we were kind of targeting for maybe a satellite spot, have that evaluated, and maybe then you hold on to it. Or if it's not a good site, you don't, and you start to try to find the places you would do those things. So there's things you can do along the way as you're on your way to it, even if it's years out, if you know that's kind of the tentative plan.
All right. Making a decision then, moving forward. We need to make a decision tonight on PAA or Wisconsin Policy Forum. And from what I've heard, the staff with direction to lessen the emphasis on the IGA.
I thought we had just talked about a few ideas were that we wouldn't make a decision tonight, that we would let them sort of look at what we just got done talking about and go back and think about it.
I think you'd make a decision tonight and then instruct them as to the actual shape and scope of their study, what they should be focusing on and what should be less of a focus.
Which then could be re-emphasized in all of the kickoff meetings that happen before data collection starts.
That's a very important point. You're all going to get a chance to sit down with them and say, you're going to say, this is, he just said, why would we spend all kinds of time on something that's off the table? They should be focusing on what all of you want them to focus on, and they will.
And to that point, I do like a lot of check-ins during studies too. So perhaps that is an additional thing that we can add, is just making sure that they are, following our direction, and something that I would prefer. Do the boards feel like they need to go into closed session, or does someone want to make a motion for?
I don't think we should go into closed session just to decide between the two.
What?
I think that's something that should be done in open.
I move that we contract with PAA for the study.
I would second that, but do we need a motion from that board and a motion from this board? Is that correct?
Yeah,
So you would second.
So I wouldn't second it, but I could
Right.
make a motion to
For the
go
village
with
board.
PAA.
For the village board.
Then I would make that motion.
It's on you guys to.
I'll second Christie's motion to contract with PAA.
And then from the village side, there's a motion by Heidi.
I'll second.
And a second from Stoa. Do we roll call votes on both sides? Okay.
No discussion?
Oh, I'm just instructing Lisa. We
Okay.
can discuss.
No, I was just saying, we talked about the PAA study and not doing a lot of the front end work, and we're saying we're gonna proceed without modifying the scope? Is that what the motion was?
I could modify my motion to include it sounds like the town would also like to remove some of those scope things. So I would be happy to modify my motion to take some of those, like the IGA,
Reviewing current governance and service agreements, kind of 12 hours of time, those sort of things.
yeah, that those are
Okay.
off the table
Yes,
for
okay.
this current study, remove it from scope.
Good. You're seconding.
Do we have to, once each individual board either affirms or shoots it down, how do we, is it just by consensus saying one from column A, none from column B, as far as the specific parts of the contract then?
Yeah, I
Or
think
does it have to actually go back to Town of Cottage Grove says, strike one, strike six, strike?
I think it depends on whether or not you're going to ask them to resubmit a cost. And, I can tell you that, well, the one path would be to say, apologies if you didn't understand what we were looking for, but we're really looking for you to at least minimize those things. If you want to go back and see what they'll submit for costs with these changes, you're welcome to do that. Then it would be, you all just as a consensus ask them to come back. Alternatively, what you can do is you can choose, it sounds like we've got a motion for the same entity, and you can then just direct them, hey, you know, you're going to at least talk about the governance when you're describing the program, but we're not really interested in getting you spending a lot of your time on that. And you tell them what to focus on, and they spend more of their time on what matters, but there's really about the same amount of effort and time put into the study. Therefore, you're not asking for a revised price, in which case you can just choose today. I think the message is very clear from both bodies at this point as to what they should be focusing on, and you'll all get an opportunity to reinforce that in your individual meetings. So you got to decide if you'd be better off just saying, hey, we're comfortable with the amount of time you're spending, but we want you to spend more time and focus on these things and less on some of the other things you had listed.
And another point for me is that this is the one that did the report in 2022, right? Why would we want somebody that did the last report that's got all the information that they used a report 4 years ago, rather than hiring somebody that's new? I'll turn my mic off.
I see what you're saying, and I concur with that, because I think, wouldn't you want a different set of eyes on, right, on the data and the information and see how it's parsed differently? I mean, in essence, you would be getting two unbiased opinions from two different sources, which potentially could lead us to a better solution.
Or conversely, you end up with conflicting reports. Who do we look at? PAA or Public Policy Forum? I see your point. I mean, a second set of eyes, you know, that old adage and everything. But having, at least in my mind, having PAA do it, they may have realized some of their shortcomings in their first report that they gave us several years ago, and yeah, I think we could probably get a more rounded report this time around, giving them a second proverbial kick at the cat.
Just one thought, is asking the chiefs what, if they had any preference between the two, and any opinions on, from the PAA study, if there's any apprehension.
Okay, so the data the PAA had was from 21 with a 22 result. It might have even been 2020 data, because I don't remember when we gave it to them. So they would be getting new, refreshed data to make their opinion on this. And PAA is using CEDAR, which is going to do a bunch of the other stuff that we didn't get before. I understand and have thought about this a lot, because there's some familiarity with PAA. They know us, we know them. There's a lot of information that Mr. Franz got about our department and provided to previous boards, and has used some of the information statewide to provide guidance to other departments that he gained here in Cottage Grove. So that might provide a little bit of a tilt to maybe not give as good of information. I can understand that. That's what I'm processing out loud, what goes through my head. I also see the things from Policy Forum, and while they said that we were engaged in the Sun Prairie thing, I didn't feel engaged in the Sun Prairie thing. So they reference opportunities that I don't know really exist because they didn't engage us, and I am concerned by that. So at the end of the day, because of the work with PAA and what I've seen for the product that they provided us today after rereading both presentations, my preference would be for PAA.
After reviewing both of them, the fire department's in the same boat. We would be in board with the PAA over Wisconsin Policy Forum.
And just final remark here, Chief Lane kind of covered the population remarks. That was my only concern with the previous study, was that even before they finalized it, we had concerns about those projections, and they kind of remained the same. But it sounds like they're open to a different process for addressing population growth this time around.
It wasn't actually the last comment. I'll make one more. The scope of this request is very, very different than the first one. Again, we're now asking them to look at things, the two services together, not to combine the services, but from a facility standpoint. And while in the last study they did say, you know, at some point you're going to have to think about adding space, that was not the focus. And from what I've heard tonight, that is going to be the focus, or the main focus. So it's a very different set of questions we're asking them this time.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I guess I'm fine with PAA. The one thing is, and Larry did talk about, you start squeezing the scope a little bit, is it worth going back to get a different cost? I'm less concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the deliverables that they've got in their proposal, and just make sure that before they begin work that we agree on they update these, because there's, you know, the fiscal analysis for the implementing the public safety impact fee. I mean, Cameron, I don't think they need to spend 32 hours doing that. It's those sort of things that I look at this and I'm going, is that going to really get to the answer we're looking for?
I think you'd be surprised at the data that's required to implement that. I think if it was Allers, I would say it would be half that, because they're more familiar with impact fees. I think they're maybe looking at something that's not 100% in their scope. So I do think that it will take them that long. And then I plan to spend at least that much time reviewing those assumptions, and hope to be, at least I hope the board allows me to be part of that process to make sure they're not missing anything.
Okay, then it's just striking the governance review. Okay.
Yeah. All right, we have 2 motions and 2 seconds for the exact same thing. And I think we're all in agreement, so we'll do a roll call votes for each board.
Okay, I'll start with the town. Anders? Aye. Williams? Aye. Fonger? Nay. And Eckhoff? Aye. And then for the village, Benzo?
I just want to clarify the motion. So the motion is to strike the governance aspect for PA. Okay. Aye.
Dahl?
Aye.
Kel Nelson?
Aye.
Murphy?
Aye.
Severson? Aye. Stoa?
Yes.
Okay, both motions pass. All right, and we do not have to go into a closed session, so I read that for no big deal. All right. So we have number 8 for the town. I think we have another second.
You want to go home? Oh, second, whatever.
It's up. All right.
Come on, guys. You did very good. Are we done now?
Yes. Do I say all those in favor? Non-debatable? Okay, the town can.
Aye.
Okay. All right.
Thanks for coming. Please come again sometime.
Yes. Trekking all the way over here. Thank you. All right, so we are going to move on then to number 9, which is discuss and consider amendment to development agreement and municipal revenue obligation with Hensiak Holdings LLC. 2 PDFs in the agenda for the village.
Conveniently, Rick is gone today, as he requested this item on the agenda prior to the official termination of his lease. But what the agreement does is it reduces his MRO for the outstanding rent. So then we're done. Once this agreement is signed, We're done with Dave. The next attachment on the agenda is for his lease. Terminates his lease effective when the new tenant takes over. But everything is as previously presented.
Discuss and consider.
I would make the motion to amend the development agreement and municipal revenue obligation with NZAC Holdings LLC as presented.
I'll second that.
All right, there's a motion by Murphy, a second by Dahl. Any discussion on this? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Number 10 is discuss and consider agreement to terminate the lease with New Tech Painting at 123 East Cottage Grove Road. Lease termination is in the agenda.
I move approval of terminating the lease.
Second.
All right, motion by Severson, second by Dahl. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Motion carries. Number 11.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second, non-debatable for the village. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.